Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 21, I sat down with Lieutenant Commander Evan Knock in Pensacola, Florida. Knockers is a third-generation naval aviator who earned his commission into the Navy via the United States Naval Academy. In the fleet, Knockers flew the MH-60 Knighthawk helicopter assigned to HSC-23, the Wildcards, based aboard Naval Air Station North Island. During his fleet tour, Knockers flew the Sierra around the world, including in Kuwait and Iraq as a Naval Air Ambulance Detachment pilot, for 7 months aboard the supply ship USNS Bridge, and as part of the massive tsunami humanitarian relief effort codenamed Operation Tomodachi. Knockers then moved to Naval Support Activity Panama City, where he continued to fly the Sierra as part of the Dragonmasters Aviation Support Unit on Airborne Mine Countermeasures flight test missions, as well as on real-world search and rescue missions in the Gulf of Mexico. Next, Knockers was selected to become a dual-designator Naval Aerospace and Operational Physiologist. Following his training aboard Naval Air Station Pensacola, Knockers returned to sunny San Diego as the first ever West Coast MH-60 Romeo Seahawk Wing Aeromedical Safety Officer. Knockers is currently assigned to Training Air Wing 6 as Wing Amso, where he's responsible for training instructors and students in the physiological aspects of G-induced loss of consciousness, hypoxia, spatial disorientation, ejection, and emergency ground egress. In his spare time, Knockers flies as an associate flight instructor at VT-10, instructing Student Naval Flight Officers in the T-6A Texan II. Thanks for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 21 with Lieutenant Commander Evan Knock. Enjoy. Knockers, thanks again for having me over. Thanks for making your schedule work to do this thing. I start these all the same way. We'll start with you the same way as well. Where were you born?
I was actually born in Pensacola, Florida.
No way.
Yeah.
Where in Pensacola?
Sacred Heart, so just right around the corner. My old man was working at Westinghouse, which is just an engineering place here. So he always loved Pensacola because he was actually a Navy pilot. So Vietnam era Navy Huey guy, volunteered to go to Vietnam, but as the war was ending. He got his wings in 72, I think. And he was trying to go to HAL 3, if you know about it, right?
Seawolves, yeah.
But at that time, he wasn't picked up. So he was instructing Hueys at, Ellison Field, I think, at the time. Flew all those out, the last bit, whenever that was. And then he was pretty disgruntled, to be honest, about not being deployed and being active, and so he got out. He did his initial time and got out, moved to Virginia, did some engineering stuff, got his master's at Virginia, worked doing some stuff, and then moved back to Pensacola for an engineering job because he liked the area. And this is years later. It was like the 80s, and hadn't flown in like 7 or 8 years, and he ran into a buddy, and one of his buddies was like, hey, you should come fly again. He's like, man, I haven't flown in forever. He's like, yeah, I just joined the reserves. We need people. Come on. He's like, all right. So he actually was a reservist HT instructor when I was growing up. So I got exposure from that. But until I was like 12, I lived here. And then that Westinghouse branch was closing here in Pensacola. So we moved to Orlando. And so I finished high school in Orlando.
I always ask folks, like, why naval aviation, why the Navy? But I think you just answered the question.
Yeah, and that's actually only part of it. So my dad's dad was a Navy pilot as well. So graduated from University of Minnesota, in the 40s, volunteered once again right as the war was ending. And so he got qualified in like the F6F Hellcat, flew Corsairs, but never actually saw any action. So he was kind of disgruntled as well. So it was kind of like my dad said, I kind of broke the mold because I actually got to go do something. But so yeah, I'm a third generation Navy pilot. My grandfather obviously didn't go to the Naval Academy, but my old man did. Not the reason I went, just to be clear. But he kind of set the bar of aviation's cool. It's a great job, And honestly, I didn't think anything of it until I was like junior year. Like I was like, oh, maybe this would be something I'd be interested in, because it was just like, play soccer. Actually an artist, so I actually thought about going to like Savannah College of Art and Design. Not doing anything. Like I had longer hair, kind of like F the military kind of thing. But then I kind of was like, man, it'd be kind of cool to have your job just be flying. And so I came home actually, and I told my dad, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about trying to be a pilot or whatever. And he's like, all right, whatever. And he kind of blew it off on initially. I was like, all right, well, he's not very impressed. And I was like, well, if I was going to do it, what should I do? He's like, well, you can go wherever. But he's like, if you did go to the academy, if you graduate, you'll get to be a pilot. I was like, that's it. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I had a 2 nothing, 700 and whatever in my class, and I got to be a pilot. I was like, oh, so as long as you make it through, you could do it. I was like, well, I'd have to get into the academy first off. So I was like, well, I'll kind of turn my act around, try and apply, which actually I think helped me. I was a pretty good student, but I wasn't the best. And I think I even wrote it on my interview that I was okay 9th and 10th grade. And then I decided, I was like, all right, I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to switch it around. I'm going to do this. And so my grades got better. And I wrote that in my application, and seemed to obviously work because I actually got in. I don't know how. And so then I went there with the intention of, I'm going to be a pilot. That's it. I want to fly. As long as I graduate, I get to fly. And sure enough, graduated, came down here and got to fly. So
what'd you study at the academy?
Actually, it was an economics major.
Really?
Once again, it was kind of like, no major there actually interested me at all. I'm not an English guy. I'm not into engineering. Go figure, go into an engineering school. But I was like, well, what can I do while I'm a pilot? What job or what thing could I learn and actually put to use while I'm a pilot? And so I was like, well, if I learn to be smart with my money, I could actually, make some use of that. So I was an economics major and decided to take as many accounting classes and those that I could about learning about actually the market and investing. And so during the past 16 years now, I think that has been very good for me because I was able to take care of ourselves in ways that I wouldn't have been able to, I think, without being an economics major. I'm sure anybody could have done it, but it definitely was the right decision for me at that time, considering you do all these other majors and then you graduate and you go be a pilot and you don't do any of them.
You don't actually do the thing.
Yeah. So I was like, well, economics seems to make sense. So
that's really cool. Okay. What was day one Naval Academy? Is it burned into your brain?
Man, I don't, it's, I guess kind of, but not really. I just remember being on the bus after you shaved your head and, with all your stuff and you're going somewhere and not knowing what the hell was going on. And that's pretty much the degree of what I really remember. And then, coming out after we swear in, I think, and, saying hey to the family and then going back into it and just kind of being like, I don't know, what was I thinking? But at the same time, it was kind of fun. There's some funny stories. And also, I think I was aware enough from my dad, once, by the way, I didn't even go back to it when I told him finally that I was accepted to the academy and I was going to go. Because originally I was like, hey, I'm going to apply. He's like, okay, whatever. Once again, kind of blew me off. And I was like, all right. And finally I told him I got in. He's like, all right, do you want to go? I was like, yes. He's like, awesome. He was quiet. He was totally calm. And to come to find out later, my parents, when I told him I was interested, went behind the closed door and were like, woo, yes, he's thinking about it. They never wanted to put any pressure on me whatsoever because they had seen that with so many other academy kids or whatever grads.
What a wonderful thing though.
Yeah.
They didn't push you one way or the other.
No, not at all. No pressure whatsoever, which is my struggle with, obviously I root for the Navy football team and I'm trying to do stuff with the kids, but make sure that they don't have any of that pressure whatsoever. But he did a good job. So anyways, going back to it, what was I even saying? We were
just talking about your dad and that first day at the academy. Yeah. I'm guessing it was like you said, it's a blur. That's what everyone tells me.
So, now that I've decided to go, my dad was like, all right, this is what happens, right? All right, if you're going to get your ass handed to you, it's going to be like this and this and this. So I was prepared for 1968 Naval Academy, but it was obviously not that. So when I showed up, still difficulties in certain ways, but I definitely was like, why aren't we doing X or Y or Z? I was waiting for it. So I think I was overly prepared in that regard, which was good. But otherwise, I was just kind of, typical, still scared, don't know anything teenager. You think you do. And there was probably times where I was like, man, what am I doing here kind of thing. And then I kind of settled into it. I got my butt handed to me the first probably year, I would say. Not in that I was getting picked on or anything, just because I was adjusting to this flow of not having control while also trying to study and do this. And honestly, I wasn't doing well at certain courses. And I was like, man, I'm just not fit for this. And I was got through chemistry with a 69.5, rounded up to a C. And I was like, all right, how am I gonna get through 4 years and get to be a pilot? But then it started like sophomore year and so on, and it started to click. So
was there any aviation exposure going through there? I know some people get to fly, maybe like do a midshipman cruise.
Yeah. So, I did this typical, the Pro-Mid one, which is like, you do an aviation week and a sub week and Marine week. And I never ever wanted to be a Marine, but whatever, still kind of exposure. And then there's like the actual being with an aviation squadron. I guess that was probably the end of my junior year, between junior and senior year, that I was with HSL 44 Swamp Foxes, I believe.
Okay.
Out of Mayport.
74 HS.
Oh, they were 44 at the time,
okay.
Right? So they're 74 now, I think, because they're HSM.
That's right.
And they were HSL at the time.
That's right.
So it was Bravos.
The mighty Bravo.
Yeah, so I flew the 60 for the first time. So actually I have flown 60 Bravos, Sierras, Romeos, but I haven't flown hotels and Fox, unfortunately, but yeah, so I got to have that exposure there. And then also I lucked out in that my brother-in-law, so my sister's 11 years older than me, she lived in Corpus because my brother-in-law is a Navy pilot. He's a reservist now, a Delta pilot, but he was an instructor at, I think he was a boomer, whatever that is, 27
or 28.
Yeah,
one of the Corpus squadrons.
And so I visited them after I had my appropriate amount of training from my Pro-Mid stuff, and I visited them, and that skipper of his squadron allowed me to fly with, not with Mike, my brother-in-law, but with somebody else. And so I got to go fly like a full-on T-34 flight, not just that typical midshipman flight where it's like take off, go see something, land. It was more like, hey, we're gonna go do aero and do it until you puke. And he did it until I puked. I mean, it was like, originally we did a bunch of fun stuff, and then it was like, all right, you're not puking, do aileron rolls until you puke. And so I puked. But that was awesome too. I mean, still had a great time. So I got exposure through that. In fact, this is kind of off topic, but I've actually separately have flown with my brother-in-law, Mike. I've flown with my college roommate, and I've flown with one of my best friends from growing up. So I've been lucky with aviation to be able to hook up some flights within legit Navy, Marine Corps type flights.
For sure. Especially
as an AMSO, it makes it a little bit easier too.
It certainly does. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Done with the Naval Academy. Now you're down here in Pensacola. API, when you went through back in the day?
API, yeah.
Any good memories from API? Or?
I mean, besides the good memory is dating my wife and not having anything to do. So
that's a good. Did you wait? Was there a really big pool of students waiting before you actually classed up?
Yeah, I mean, I did this one language study abroad program out of the academy. So I actually went to Germany for a month as like an integration type thing where you get exposure, travel around, practice your German, which, of course, every time I'd say, ein Bier bitte, they'd start speaking English to me because they wanted to work on their English more than I could work on my German. But I did that as an initial thing. It was a good deal. And then came down here after 30 days of basket leave. So it was probably like so I had May and June, and then I finally showed up even July I was off, and then August I showed up here. The wait was until like November, I think is when I classed up for API. So November, December, because I think I showed up to Whiting, like it was either late January or early February, if that timeline makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
But those months of, I think it was like August, September, October, I was basically just, checking in, doing nothing.
Yeah. The pool life, as they say.
Yeah, right. In fact, actually, I didn't know my wife at that time. I had met her later, actually. So I didn't date her during that time. But, there was some gaps between training is when I did have plenty of time. So.
Gotcha. Where'd you end up going to primary?
I was slated to go to Corpus, and I traded to go to Whiting.
Me too.
So there was a couple of reasons. Obviously, being from here, I knew a bunch of people. I'm a Florida boy. Obviously, I wanted to be in Florida. A lot of people are like, wow, Corpus is the place to go, blah, blah, blah. Only the married people are staying in Pensacola. I was like, okay, well, whatever, I want to stay. So I was like, well, then if that's the case, then do you want to go to Corpus? And I found a friend, actually, who some of his roommates were already going, and so he offered to swap with me. But even still, after offering to swap, I had to go to the API, whatever, Stucon guy, and bring him a bottle of liquor, to seal the deal. Yeah. And so he swapped me over, and it is a good thing because while I was here, that's obviously when I met my wife. And the biggest thing was, and I know people, it always changes here or there, but I was always interested in helicopters, being my dad was a helicopter guy, right? So I was always like, well, do you need to try and go jets? Because like, you know, that's the top thing, but I'm also kind of like a helicopter guy as a legacy, and it's kind of my lifestyle. I was like back and forth, but I knew that if it came down to it, I wanted helicopters over big wing. No offense to my big wing friends, but I definitely wanted helicopters. And so I knew, or at least the rumor was, that if you stayed in Whiting, your chances of getting helicopters were better, and if you were in Corpus, your chance of getting big wing was better. And people were like, don't put anything to it. But sure enough, the week I got my selection, whenever that was, probably the summer of 2007, there was a guy in my class who wanted big wing like nothing else, right? And he got helos. And then sure enough, there was a guy same week in Corpus who wanted helicopters and got big wing. The cool thing was they allowed them to switch no cost. So they at least were like, all right, we understand you both want it. Like, the Navy has to save money, so they let them actually swap spots. But so sure enough, it came true that if you were in one location, there was some potential for that to happen. And luckily, you know, I was in Whiting and got to stay at Hilo. So
absolutely. Was there any? Did you have any aviation exposure? You talked about, you know, the family stuff, but did you get to do any flying prior to that first official flight, you know, in the T6 as a student? Good Lord, T6, T34.
T34,
yeah, T34 Charlie.
Yeah. You know, one of my college friends had a yak. Yeah.
A yak? No way.
Yeah. So
I like this friend.
I know, right? So it was actually during one of the summer cruises in San Diego. He's like, hey man, you want to go fly on my plane? I was like, sure. Like, didn't know much about it, thinking it was like a Piper or Cessna or something. And then we show up and I was like, oh, that looks like a T-34. He's like, yeah, it basically is. He's like, we're going to go do aero and everything. And I was like, this is awesome. So I jumped in the back and he just did everything. And so that was like my first real exposure separate of that T-34 flight. Cause now I feel like I was a little bit more aware and I was kind of with the guy. I knew him and he could kind of talk me through stuff, rather than the instructor just kicking my butt like he did in T-34. But so I got that exposure. And then also a friend of mine here in Pensacola, she was an Embry-Riddle graduate, and so she was a CFI, and so I'd flown with her. And then also one of my best friends growing up, who's an Air Force civil servant, he actually like spent his own money to get pilot qual just because he wanted to. And so we actually went and flew with him a couple of times as well. So.
The reason I asked, did that help you? Did it get you ready for Navy flight training at all?
No,
not even close. Yeah. And I feel the same way. I mean, I tell folks like a lot of people, for some reason, there's this gouge out there that, you know, don't go spend the money, you learn it the Navy way. There is something to be said for that. But did my 100, 200 hours of civilian time, was it identical? Absolutely not. It was very different, but it was still helpful in some small way. You had to make radio calls and be in the airspace and all that. But it's always interesting to, some people find it was very helpful. Some people had to unlearn a bunch of stuff from the civilian side.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If I had been more engaged and actually like known what I was doing when I was riding with them, then I'm sure I could have learned a lot more and it would have been useful. But no, I mean, even when I was going to flight school, I was like, all right, cool. Like, I'm just going to learn it as I go. And, obviously that was the sucking from a fire hose approach, but it worked out. I just definitely, I think back to like soloing, I'm like, man, how do they give us the keys to the aircraft?
It is insane. 13 flights.
Yeah. And then like the solo itself, that's one thing. But then the aerobatic solo, even more so. I'm just like.
Or a formation solo.
Yeah. It's just, right? Like. But I mean, it's pretty cool, builds confidence. But yeah, looking back on it, I don't know if it's just because it's been, 14, 15 years. But I don't remember knowing much. So I don't know if it's because I forgot it all or I really didn't know that much at the time, but I assume I knew enough. Obviously they passed me.
Any good memories from primary? Any cross countries or good flights?
Shoot. I mean, cross country to Boston, that's a long way.
Holy
T-34.
Moly. Yeah, it is a long way. Like 3 or 4 legs.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
I mean, there was VT-10 T6s there when we got there that had been there for hours, and we had taken forever. But I don't know why we went to Boston. I visited a friend there. But that was a long ways. Otherwise, no. I mean, like, I feel like it was pretty uneventful. I had my on-wing was an Argentinian exchange. So flew the A-34 in Argentina.
Yeah, I think they use it for like the forward air controlling, even an attack platform. Yeah.
So he was cool. I liked him a lot. I always felt like he, sounded like he had a glass of scotch and a cigar in the back, just kind of chilled. Although one time I pissed him off pretty bad when, doing approach to installs, and I sucked. And, finally he just like, give me the controls, and he flipped the aircraft over, and he's like, see the ground? Like, do you want to die? And I was like, no, I don't want to die. He's like, and he like threw the checklist at me, and once he rolled it back over, he's like, don't do that again. I was like, all right. And I didn't do it again after that. But yeah, he was good. I liked him a lot, actually. It was always funny though, because he would have to have me make the radio calls sometimes just because they couldn't understand him because of his language barrier. He'd be like, tell him what the fuck I am trying to say. So sorry about the cursing, but that's what he said.
That's what he said. Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So that was good. And then, I did the tie cutting ceremony with him, and that was fun too. Cause I don't know, I feel like I had a pretty good speech. And I've used it multiple times throughout my career, which we can talk about later. But yeah, that's pretty much the primary thing. And then it was off to the
TH-57.
Yeah, which I was stoked about.
Which squadron did you go to at
HT8?
HT8.
Yeah,
okay.
so it was VT6 and then HT8. And then, obviously after that we go to the FRS. But HT28 was just starting at the time. So I didn't know where I was going to end up. I didn't really necessarily have a preference, except for my old man was an HT8 instructor, so I thought that'd be kind of cool. So ended up at HT8 and went through there, and I loved, like, from the moment I got in the helicopter and started like hovering, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And to me it felt like I don't know, to me it felt like when you're on a hydraulics roller coaster ride where it kind of like lifts up, and you're like, that first time we lifted off the ground, I was like, oh, this is just so unique of a feeling that I had never really had much exposure to, that I was like, oh, I think I'm really going to be into this. So, and then I feel like I did a lot better in advanced than I did in primary. Things started to click. I was like,
why do you think that was?
I think, primary is that the whole NSS thing, right, is like how fast people actually learn stuff, how fast they can click with things. And I wasn't there. But I think once I had that background, like you talked about, like if I had something civilian before, then maybe I would have done better in primary. But into primary, I was kind of like, I don't know what's going on. I do, but I don't. But then by the time you finish primary, I had the studying routine down, the chair flying, the briefing, the like going through stuff, that going into advanced, I was like, all right, I got this. I forgot to mention, sorry, we'll go back to primary.
No
for
worries.
a second.
Yeah, we can go back.
Maybe one of the reasons I also didn't do as well for primary was on my sims, I probably didn't get as much training as I probably should have. I know it sounds funny, right? But this is the reason. So many times I would start a sim, and I'd be like in the middle of a sim, and they'd be like, man, knock. Hey, is your old man Gary Knock? I'm like, yeah. And so then the whole rest of the sim, they like open up the sim door, the slide, and they'd be like, put their shoulder over. They'd be like, hey, and they just start talking about, and they'd be like, turn here. I didn't even have to do point to points. They're just like directing you where to go. And I was like, I need to actually learn some of this stuff a little bit. But at the same time, my old baseball coach is one of the instructors up at Whiting. So what I would do is I brought him a bottle of liquor, and I'd go sit down with him, and I'd be like, hey, I got these flights coming up. Can you just talk me through them? And so I could chair fly all of those beforehand. So going through instruments, that portion, I actually feel like I did pretty good. And then one of the other instructors, I thought he was going to totally fail me because of this, but I jump into the cockpit procedural trainer, like before you do anything. And this is Jack Omer. He's got like 16,000 total flight hours, old Marine guy, was in Yuma forever. And not commercial airline 16,000. It's like mostly military and then personal time. And so anyways, he sits down in there and he's like, you remember me? I was like, yeah, I remember you, sir. He's like, we were neighbors. I was like, yeah. He's like, you used to always jump on my roof and over my fence. I was like, yep. So I was like, here we go, right? Because he was also one of the four horsemen. Like he was one of those guys who like was not necessarily easy, but he passed me and everything was good. But in fact, he even showed up to my wings, and that's why I know how many hours he had, because my dad asked like everybody who was there how many hours they got, and then everybody's talking how many thousands, and he's just like way up.
Far and above. Yeah.
Exactly.
Very cool. Did your dad get to pin you when you owned your wings?
Yeah, he did.
That's so cool.
And he pinned me with my grandfather's wings.
No way.
Yeah, which is extremely difficult because if you look at the wings from 1940, they aren't the frogs on the back. I can actually show them to you later, but it's the sideways one.
Yes.
Yeah, so you actually had to slide it in.
Oh, we got to practice that beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. So I have those, and then I have my dad's as well, and then I have the ones they actually gave me. So
what a tradition. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Third generation.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Okay, so after that, did you actually? Let me back up. Where could you have gone after Whiting? Because the choices. So let's see. When I went through, it was Sierras or Romeos, so a version of a 60, and then where I went, 53s, East Coast, on the Navy side. But I know we used to have a little bit more diversity in the fleet. Where could you have gone? Where did you want to go, leaving once you winged?
Yeah. So I put in San Diego HSC first, and then I think I put HSC all of them because I just really wanted the Sierra. And then I put, I think it was still HSL or HSM. Like there were people that were getting HSM, but you could also be going HSL, and then you would transition. Because like some of my friends, went Bravo, and were Bravo their whole time. In fact, when I went back through the FRS as an AMSO, skipping ahead, there were people who were just now flying the Romeo for the first time on the department head tour. But yeah, so it was 53s. It was, and then it was like, obviously HSC or HSL/M, depending on what group. And then it was kind of location was Japan. Obviously there's Guam, Hawaii, and then San Diego, Norfolk, Mayport. I think that's everything.
Yeah,
so,
sounds right.
And I put Japan at the very bottom of everything, which if I could go back, to be honest, I love San Diego. I'm so happy it was my first choice, and I would keep it number one. But I probably would put Japan number two after visiting it. It's an awesome place.
But you got number one. That's your first choice.
I did. I was very lucky. Don't know. Well, and the interesting thing is, I think I only got my first choice because the guy who finished ahead of me, because I think I was the number two guy in that class, he wanted Mayport HSM. So if he had wanted HSC San Diego, he would have got it. And so I was lucky enough to get the next slot. I don't know if that's how it was determined or not, but yeah, so I got it and was stoked and headed to San Diego and never looked back.
And the Sierra at this point is still, it's still a pretty new helicopter, but then it's a very, very new airframe, right?
Yeah, in fact, so when I showed up to HSC 3, most of those instructors were, at least the JO instructors at the FRS were Sierra guys, but definitely any department heads and senior. And then of course, once I showed up to my squadron, were 46 guys, right? So my skippers, my department heads were 46 guys who had transitioned to the 60 Sierra, I felt it was as close to still being HC as it could be before it became HSC. So this is, 2008.
It's funny you mentioned that. I don't know a lot of the frog guys, but one of the things I was told, that helicopter, tandem rotor, it kind of looks like a baby Chinook for those that aren't familiar. Yeah. But you could get a really cool side flare going on. That was a big thing with vert rep, right? Was really being efficient. And then some of those, obviously you have a main rotor and a tail rotor in a Sierra, a little bit limited on power, right? 30% roughly goes to the tail rotor. Mm-hmm. And so you can get yourself in trouble if you fly some of those 46 techniques in a Sierra. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I've heard that rumor.
Yeah, so in theory, that would be the fear, but it definitely didn't stop us
from doing it. Yeah. I'm sure it's a ton of fun. It looks like a ton of fun.
So, that's the difference. And I'm not hating on HS at all. So, it was HS and it was, Fox Hotel guys. And I love some of those guys. But we still knew how to fly that 60 Sierra. It'll never be the frog. We know that, right? But I was taught by frog dudes how to do it. And I sucked at first. But obviously I got it. And there was one time when I was vert repping on deployment where, I think I did, I don't know how many loads in an hour, but it was a decent amount by myself because our other aircraft was down, and I think those Fox Hotel guys were going to join us. And then I counted the amount of loads once they joined us. It was the exact same amount, like total, right?
Wow.
So I could only do half as much as I could because I was limited by them. And I'm not blaming them. They're great, but that wasn't their primary bread and butter job. But yeah, there's definitely some cowboys that probably flew the 60 Sierra beyond what it should have been. But I think, it was all about energy management. If you were smart about it, to be honest, and this is one thing that we always would argue about too, is people would be so afraid of the side flare. Like, oh, you're going to put yourself in a bad spot. I always felt safer, to be honest, because if anything happened, I still had that energy where I could just roll it off. Whereas when you're just like straight in slow, it's like, where are you going to go? You know? And I think once you started to show other people that, like, that was one of the cool things, not to skip ahead, but in Panama City, I was the Sierra guy and everybody else was 53 guys. And I taught them, hey, this is how you vert rep. And at first, you know, they're like, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I remember when I first showed up, they needed a load to be dropped off at an LCS, you know, for like the Nat Geo special was recording, which you can actually see it. And I love watching it because the ship guys are like, it's foggy, but those, you know, aviation guys aren't coming or whatever. I'm like, yeah, because it's freaking foggy. Like I remember this day, you know, they're giving us a hard time, but I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Cause I still had the qual and everything. So, but I remember when I came to pick up the load, you know, I came in, side flared, pick it up, and I got back home later that day and my boss was like, when you came in, I thought I was going to lose my job. Like he's like, what is this guy doing? Like he didn't know because he's a 53 guy. Like he'd seen it, but not like that close or whatever. And like I was like, no, that's the way we do it. And I taught him. And then of course everybody loved it after that.
It's funny. So we're having the side flare discussion, right? It's funny because in the helicopter world, a lot of guys will, and I don't want to dig too deep and get too nerdy into it, but low transition is what you think of with a jet, right? Maybe it's not a low transition with a helicopter. You pick up into a hover and then you just kind of you kiss the cyclic forward, go into forward flight. You use that ground effect. And in the helicopter EMS world, those guys are taught, and I'm not going to speak to each company's way of doing it, but a lot of times they'll get into a very, very high hover. And then at the top of that, I mean, they might be 100 feet up, then they're going to transition to forward flight. And my mind says, if I bag a motor, I want to be down low with all that energy. I can stop right there. I don't want to be teetering up to 75 or 100 feet, bag a motor with no forward speed, and now I'm just going to kind of glop down toward the ground.
It's not just your mind. I mean, it's what the chart shows. Right?
Indeed it is. But some companies, they are, it's interesting, you know, back home in Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Air Evac, or Langer, they all have different policies, different procedures. Yeah. But pretty common is that super high hover and then going. They don't want you to do that right into forward flight. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting because you're right. Yeah, I would read it from the performance. Okay, yes, it looks fun and it is fun and it is cool. But from a performance standpoint, it's actually better, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing with side flare and all that. I mean, there's benefits to everything, even like all the stuff like landing in the dirt and the way that you do it. Obviously, there's benefits to it being that cool profile of coming in
forward and down.
Yeah, exactly. So it looks badass, but also there's a purpose behind it.
Exactly. Yep. So. Okay, well, I jumped a little bit ahead. Let's get back to HSC 3. You're learning to fly the Sierra, so it's the biggest helicopter you've ever flown at this point, right?
Yeah.
What was it like?
Awesome. I loved it.
Did the 57 prepare you for it, that little Bell 206? Did that get you ready?
You know, I can't remember if the 60 Sierra was hard to learn or not. I think the hardest part, honestly, was glass cockpit. I remember when I selected 60 Sierras, which I knew I wanted Sierras because I wanted vert rep. You know, I wanted HC. My brother-in-law, the one I mentioned before, was a 46 guy. So when they're like, "Hey, cool, you're going to the Sierra. It's a new helicopter, glass cockpits." I'm like, "Cool, aren't all cockpits glass? Like, what do you mean?" And they're like, "No, it's like this computer screens and stuff." I was like, cool, I guess. Like I had no idea. So then when I went in on the sims, that's what kicked my butt, was going from steam gauges to, you know, the actual tapes and then being like, you're a foot off altitude or whatever. It's like, how do you, I can't see that, you know? So that was probably the hardest part. Trimming, I think it was pretty straightforward.
That AFCS is incredible. Yeah. It does a lot of the work for you.
Yeah. So like, I really don't remember it being a super difficult aircraft. Okay. Maybe some of my former instructors would have been like, well, I would say otherwise, but
yeah, for sure. What was it like flying around the San Diego area? I've gotten to go out there once. I'm about to go out there in about a week or two for a low safe det again. It is so pretty, but man, that airspace is busy. Yeah,
it really is super busy. It definitely has some risks associated with it, in that it's busy, especially like going around Point Loma and stuff. But I loved it, especially, you know, I like to surf. So it was great, especially if you flew with an instructor who liked to surf, because it was like on the way home, it's like, all right, let's go check out the spot. So, and I lived up in Solana Beach at the time because my roommate, one of my best friends from growing up, and he was a Marine. So we split the difference. He was Pendleton, you know, I was North Island, and we lived halfway. And then after that, it was probably like, not skipping ahead, but to 23 when I got married. My wife, we moved into that place, so it was cool too because she was right by the beach, so I could always fly by and see her and stuff. But San Diego was great. The scary thing was obviously the monster, if you will, of the big gray whatever weather that would roll in. The marine layer.
That's what I was going to ask about.
The roll in.
Yeah.
That would be the scary thing. There would be so many times where it's like you do an approach into Miramar or something, and it was like you do your approach and then you'd wave off to the west. And it was like, oh, the clouds are coming in. You come around to do another one, and then like as you're touching down, like everything's just sucking over top of you. You're like, oh, we need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Like it is getting here quick. So,
is that a certain time of year, or is that all the year? It's always that constant churn.
May, June, right? They always say the May gray, June gloom is when it's like really gray. But it seems like any time it can just happen. Like you can just look out and it can be there. And
we're talking about like, I'm not going to say 0, but pretty close to it.
Yeah, because it's not like, it's not like a layer where, all right, fine, we got to have mins. Like, yes, it's bad weather, but I'm going to have my mins. It just rolls in as this constant wall.
From the surface up to, whatever altitude.
So it's perfectly clear over here, straight up to forever, right? I can see the stars, but as soon as that layer comes in, then we're going to, experience it.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. Okay, let's see. Anything else from the FRS you can think of? Anything memorable? Learning to fly the 60?
No. I guess that would have been my first scare. Was we started to get tail rotor kicks on a night SAR flight.
No way.
Yeah. So, and my instructor was like, oh, like I could hear like when he was like, oh, that's when I was like, oh, okay. So, we're breaking out the checklist. Like, why is this happening? Don't see anything. All right, we're going to transit in altitude to be able to put this in if we need to. And of course, I'm like rechecking my habit bottle and like doing everything. And so we really weren't sure. And come to find out, the next day or next week or whatever, it was an AFCS issue. It was really random. It was actually like causing the tail rotor to kick, but in a way that definitely represented that something was happening. But we had no secondaries, we had nothing else. And so he's like, we can make it back. We have these, safeguards in place, blah, blah, blah. And so we came back and we were fine. But that was definitely the first time where I was like, oh, a little bit of a pucker moment.
At night over the water. Yeah, that's a bad place to be if you lose the tail.
Yeah.
I have I'll keep it super short, but I was flying a flight up in Bahrain, and we were doing a night FAM, basically 2 hours of nighttime, rehack everyone's current. So we went north, and about halfway, so we were about as far north away from the island as we could have been. We're turning around, and all of a sudden, my TACAN flag starts spinning. No glass cockpits for us in the 53. It's all steam gauges. Needle starts spinning. I was like, well, I wasn't doing that earlier. It's kind of strange. And a new co-pilot and the aircraft commander, hey, write that up when you get back. It was the first MAF I ever put in, actually. So it was a night flight. Next morning, I'm on AM watch because, of course, that's how it goes, right? Night into mornings. And so the guys are out there pre-flighting. It takes about an hour to pre-flight the helicopter. And the aircraft commander, I'll just say his call sign, Snowden, he comes in and he goes, hey, man, you need to go out and look at the aircraft. I was like, okay. He goes, you flew it last night? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And the antenna for the TACAN had fallen off. It disconnected itself. And when it fell down on one of those drive shafts going to the tail.
Jeez.
And it's bouncing. This metal thing is bouncing on the top almost like a lathe. Because those drive shafts are not solid.
Right.
It's like a Coke can that's spinning.
Right.
And it put a pretty good gouge in it. And if we'd lost our tail at night over the water, you're kind of hosed. So, okay, makes perfect sense. Yeah, not a happy place to be. You mentioned HSC 23, though. That was where you went next. What's the squadron name?
Wildcards.
Wildcard. Okay, I've heard that one before.
So, I don't know I think we got to put in preferences. It was 21, 23, and 8. HSC 8 was the first HSC, they were had become HSC, and now they were flying Sierras.
But they're on the East Coast, right?
They might be now.
Oh, but they were out there. Okay.
Yeah, so they were the 8-ballers.
Yes. The reason I mentioned that, generally odd-numbered West Coast, even-numbered East Coast.
Which I think it's now odd-numbered old-school expeditionaries West, even-numbered carrier West.
I'm sure that makes some kind of sense.
Or at least it was.
Okay.
So anyways, and I wanted obviously 23 or 21 because I wanted HC rather than HS.
Yep.
The guys going to 8 all seemed great and everything, but I wanted HC. And then 23 was across from the I-bar. So I was like, I want 23. So we could walk over to the I-bar afterwards. And I was lucky enough to get I-bar or get 23.
Not necessarily in that order. Yeah. That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
So what was it like that first day when you walk in, you're in your khakis, you got your NATOPS jacket, you're checking into a new squadron, you got your wings, obviously.
Gosh, you ask great questions. It's another one of those things where I don't think I remember.
It wasn't memorable.
Too
That's
much.
fine. I don't think my day was either. I'm just always curious, like
Yeah.
that first exposure to like a wardroom environment when you're actually part of it. You're not just a student.
I don't remember. I think it was also because like I was checking in, like I finished the FRS like right around Christmas time. So I feel like I checked in like, and it was kind of empty around the squadron and stuff, and it just kind of like snuck in, and then, and I don't even remember my first flight. I don't remember much at all.
Okay.
Other than like just kind of getting into it. And then I do remember my first vert rep, and that was when I was pretty new.
What was your load? Do you remember what you were hauling?
It was an ammo unload to a Gator off of Pendleton. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Okay,
And
like small arm stuff or big stuff?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I think it was mostly, it was probably all over the place. But I remember
It's the Marines, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it was one of those times where, obviously it was the new guy and everybody's ragging on me for being like high, coming in so high and taking forever to get a load and everything. And, you had all these older guys who were just like crushing it and nailing it every time. I was like, oh, I can't wait to be like that. But so I remember that. And then I kind of just remember getting in the flow. And I remember being put in ops. I hated that. Gosh, I hated that so much. So I was a sketch writer. And they were like, you're not going to deploy till like May the following year. So you're talking like 2000. And so I was there. So this is 2009, it's the beginning of 09. I'm like being put in skeds and they're like, you're to probably deploy in like summer of 10, and I was like, man, a year and a half in the squadron before I finally deploy. So I was a sketch writer for like 6, 7, 8 months and, doing as much as I can to get as many quals as I can. And so I got everything I needed to be able to deploy just in case. And sure enough, on my birthday, September 4th of 2009, they came in and they're like, hey, HSC 85, which is a FTS and reserve squadron, is not able to supply their reserve person to the NAD. Do you want to go? And I was like, okay. And the NAD is Naval Air Ambulance Detachment, so it's a composite squadron of 21, 23, 25, which is Guam, and then 85. The 85 component, usually one person or two people or whatever. So they're like, yeah, do you want to go? And you'd be leaving in 11 days. And I was like, okay, I just got married like 2 months ago, but
it's going to be a fun conversation.
I really want to get out of ops.
Yep. And that's the way to do it.
So I gave up and I was like, hey, I have this opportunity and it would be awesome. Can I go? What do you think? And she's like, yeah, totally go. So, so literally a couple of months after we drove her out here to live in San Diego, she turned around and drove back the other way. So I didn't actually live in 11 days because there was a little bit of an El Centro debt that I was able to jump in on, but I definitely left before the end of September. It was within a few weeks. And so, jumped on that 18-hour flight to Kuwait, whatever the heck that was, and slept for 2 days when I finally got there and jumped right in. And it was cool because I was an individual. Even though there was some 23 people there, those 23 people were going to be leaving soon, and the next 23 people weren't going to be coming for. So I was kind of like a free floater with 21, with 23, kind of my own thing, which was awesome.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah, it really was. And the guys at 21, took me in, and the skipper, the XO of 23 was the composite commander at the time out there as well. So yeah, it was great. I loved it. So
can you kind of unpack what's the mission set? Are you flying out of Kuwait? Are you in Iraq? Where are you going? What are you doing?
So I was flying out of Udari Army Airfield in Kuwait. And then I was originally, when we first showed up, slated to go up into Iraq, but then they started to separate it where Guam was going to have, so 25 was going to have Iraq only. And then, 21 and 23. And I think eventually 23 was going away and 21 was going to have down in Kuwait. I can't remember, but I was, in between.
And you're right on the border. From Udari, if you fly a little too far north, you're in Iraq. So you're very close.
Yeah. And so and often that's where we would fly, especially there was a place called Buka, which was right on the border of Iraq.
I've heard the names, but I've never been. Yeah.
And that was the one place we could fly single ship. So we could go to Buka and pick up somebody from there and then come back down south. Obviously, anything above that, then we were usually flying a formation flight. But I think one of the reasons, and I don't want to, rag anybody out for anything, but one of the reasons I did stay in Kuwait was I was, like a 9-month or, 2P at this point. So I was decently enough senior.
Yeah, you're a co-pilot, but you're not an aircraft commander yet.
Right, and I was trusted enough that they basically flew me with this one hack over and over, kind of to...
Okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Kind of to keep him in check a couple times.
Yeah. That is a thing. Fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah. So one of those hack butts, but
that is, it's funny. I was talking to a friend who was at safety school. He's a big wing guy, and I mentioned the term hack butt, and he was like, "Wait, is that a thing?" I just heard that for the first time. I'm like, unfortunately, it can be.
It totally is.
Yeah, but you're going to pair that person with a strong co-pilot, someone like you. It sounds like that's going to keep everyone safe, doing the right mission, doing the right thing.
Right, because unfortunately, I mean, and I'm sure if there was air crew to listen to this, there were multiple crewmen who had specifically said they will not fly with this person.
Yeah, that happens too.
And so I was asked. They basically sat me down. They're like, "Hey, we're going to have you fly with this person." To make the crewmen feel better, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And, I'll learn and whatever. And I do remember it was even funny. We had like a good deal flight that he got on. It was like a photo shoot. There was like a PAO. When we actually went to Iraq, we went up to, where did we go in Iraq for that one? I can't remember exactly, but we were flying up in Iraq and we were like doing formation stuff. And like, I was like, get closer, man. Like we're supposed to be like tight and showing him what we could do. And this guy just wouldn't do it. I was like, God, come on. Like we're in a photo shoot. Like you got to make us look cool. But I mean, he wasn't a bad guy. He just,
Yeah. So I'm guessing chaff flares, got the gun. Like you guys are kitted out, right?
Yep. So, which luckily, like I never, had to deal with any of that. The bases would get rocketed every once in a while. I don't remember ever having to hit the deck. And then, we didn't ever really have to put anything out. You'd often get the alerts from like the oil rig. I don't know what they call those things, but basically wherever their oil refinery was, and they had the burning flames.
Oh, really?
So it was kind of bad because it desensitized you, right? Because you'd fly past this flame, and you get the alert that the infrared or whatever was going off, and I should know all these terms, but it's been a long time, and so I didn't really. Usually you'd be like, oh, whatever, like you just thought it was, oh, it's the flames, which is so bad because if it was actually something important, you have
seconds to respond.
Yeah. Which funny story of someone else. Once again, I won't use names, but somebody one time was flying. It was like, oh, look, there's like fireworks. And the person's like, break right. Like it was someone shooting bullets at them. It was not fireworks.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh my gosh.
Fireworks in Iraq are generally tipped with lead.
Yeah.
Let's talk more Iraq stuff. So I think I asked, but I already forgot to follow up on it. The mission, you talked about you were doing medical evacuation?
Yeah. So the Naval Air Ambulance Detachment purpose was obviously medevac for if there were certain times we would land in the dirt and pick somebody up from something that actually happened. A lot of the times, especially by the time I was showing up, things were slowing down. So we used the call sign dust off because we were doing the Army dust off mission. A lot of Army helicopters were now off Afghanistan. So the 60 Sierra is built identical to the inside of a Black Hawk, right? So, hey, you have the litter management system, you have the ballistic protection system, you can fill this mission. And what year the NAD really started using the Sierra, I'm not sure, but obviously we were fulfilling this role. But sometimes it was just taking people from hospital to hospital, taking people who were stable enough, maybe at one hospital in Iraq, to now come down to Kuwait to jump on a big wing and go to Germany. So it was depressing sometimes when you would get a call. It's like medevac. And you're like, sweet, jump in your freaking aircraft, get it started and go. And then you go jump and you see your patient like smoking a cigarette and like loading up, and you're like, oh man, this is the guy we're rescuing. So when we finally got good ones, and I feel guilty about this even to this day, you were excited.
No, it makes sense. You're doing the thing. Yeah.
But this good one,
you don't want someone to be hurt. You want to be there in their moment of need to help them. Yeah. That's what it is.
But I can say it wouldn't have mattered. This guy, he died before we probably even showed up. But I remember waking up. It was medevac. We took off, and it was on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. And I remember even my hack. This is a good hack at the time. It was a department head from 21. And he's like, this is a good one. And so I'm like running out to the aircraft, and like he's getting all the info, and I remember I was just like pulled as much power as I could, and we were just hauling as fast as we could. And he was letting me fly, which is really cool too, because like we showed up and I saw the flares, and I was just like whipped it around, and I was in the dirt and like that. Like we were on the ground and we were loading them up, and then before we knew it, we were airborne again. and we were hauling. And I remember both me and the hack like looked back at our crewmen, and they were working so hard on this guy. I mean, they were working so hard. And I'm sorry, I feel bad because obviously the guy passed away, but we got him to the hospital, and then they took him in. This is back at Udari, and they just were trying to get him, and later that day, the surgeon came, and he's like, hey, there's nothing we could have done. The guy he was dead. But I really, really feel bad because we flew with crewmen, and then we flew with the SAR med techs, right? And so those guys together were just going as much as they could, but they were like CPR, mouth to mouth with literal bits of brain matter, while they were doing this to try and keep the guy alive. And
they're
he was
doing
just
everything they can.
19-year-old Army dude. And it wasn't even, and the worst part about it wasn't even a freaking act of war or anything. It was this giant wall fell on him, and he got crushed basically. And so tried to save him, and they tell us that he was dead before, but who knows? But we thought it was a good one. We're going to save this guy, and it was a failure, obviously, in all of our eyes that we didn't do so. But there were other days where there was success, and I had some like random car wrecks. Things would flip over or whatever, and you pick them up and land in the dirt, and those ones would be the ones you felt better about, getting somebody back in time. And it definitely had its moments, and it's awesome flying, right? Like separate of all the other stuff, and being on deployment, flying low and fast, and just landing in the dirt as fast as you freaking can, and then getting back home. It was like, if you're into sports and competition, it was like every day is like, all right, how fast can I do this? And there was routes too. We would practice that where you'd have those rainbow routes out in Kuwait, and it's like, how fast can you fly these and do that? And so,
is it still the safer routes, safer 1, safer 2?
Maybe.
That's what I flew when I was there, but it was
Yeah.
very canned, and I don't think it's quite the exact same thing.
Okay.
I can understand that feeling. I don't think there's a lot of people that necessarily have that alert mission. I mean, there are small subsets, right, within the Navy, maybe not Navy helicopters, that have an alert mission where you're literally cocked and locked, ready to go, and then it sounds like literally a klaxon sounds, and you go out to the bird and go fly.
Yeah. But it was pretty cool. I tell people about how, the difference in, that mission was so cool, because I would wake up from dead sleep, run out to the aircraft, turn everything on while still putting my gear on, and then once the other guys are out there, jumping in and starting it up, and like being airborne from that moment that call is made to less than 15 minutes, obviously is the goal, and being airborne within 7 or whatever it is, it's like, that's the fun part, right? It's a competition, regardless. Even if you're going to pick up that a-hole who's smoking cigarettes too much and got dehydrated in the desert because he didn't drink enough water. All right, whatever. We still saving your life, I guess.
Yeah, you're still there to help them. Yeah. You mentioned the weather out there. What's it like? I know it's hot as all get out, but it's kind of hard to put it in words. Maybe you've got better words than I do.
Yeah, well, luckily I was there from September till March, so my 6 months was, as far as it goes, pretty good.
That's
Everything was winding
there.
down, and then obviously I got out of there before it got too bad. I had my dust storms. I still had the heat. It was funny to me that I show up and remember being like, where's the water? And they're like, outside. And it's just like these giant piles of, they're basically pallets of water, bottled water that are like melted, from 110 degree heat. And I'm like, this can't be good. Like, definitely going to get cancer from drinking this. I mean, there's so many ways I'm getting cancer for being an aviator anyways, but that's one of them. But yeah, super hot. But luckily, it started to cool off. And if anything, it got cold in the winter. Obviously, it's desert. But I was there in probably the best time, because it was cool, because once again, you had the inlet barrier filters for the engines to block the extra dust from, sand and stuff from getting in there, which reduced your power. So going back to how we were talking about that vertical takeoff and basically being screwed if you lost an engine, certain areas we had to go to, the hospital pad within the, chain link fence and all the gates or whatever on the small base, wherever it was you would land, and then once you had that patient on, and if there was other people, you're at, the maximum allowable. So you would have to usually open the inlet barrier filters to get that extra couple percentage just to be able to take off, and you're going up, and then kind of transition. So luckily, it being cooler for most of my time flying there, I didn't deal with power restraints as much as those guys in the middle of summer did.
Absolutely. That makes a big difference. That extra couple percent can sometimes be the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Any other good memories from that 6 months?
No, I mean, just great flying.
What was Iraq like? Let me ask about that. I don't think I mentioned it.
So Iraq's food was better.
Okay.
The base sucked more. So like I never actually stayed in Iraq. I would go to Iraq for like the day or something like that. Or I think I stayed overnight like once or twice. I can't remember. But my home base was always Kuwait. But yeah, the food was better up there. It's like healthier options and whatnot. But Iraq actually is pretty. A lot of people kind of forget about that too. Like Kuwait is not pretty. It is just dusty, nasty,
Small country too.
Yeah. But then when you fly over the border, it's still not necessarily pretty all over. But when you would get along the water in Iraq in certain areas, like, oh, this is actually, okay, I could see this being, more of that birthplace of civilization type thing, as opposed to when I was in Kuwait, I was like, who would ever live here? I just can't see it. But Iraq was cool in that. But it was one of those things where Iraq seemed to be the cooler place because it's like you might do more or whatever. But I also was like, I'm fine in Kuwait. Like I was totally chill. Like had a great gym. It was basically an Army mission, right? So I was just eating Army food and getting my workout in, not worrying about being on a boat. And so joined the Navy, see the world, just go be in a dust pit for 6 months. But honestly,
Sure.
It was fine. I liked it.
Well, one last Kuwait question. What was it like working with the Army? Because you're still pretty new into the Navy. You're still learning Navy stuff. But
Yeah. Luckily,
was there a lot of interaction cross service there?
Yeah, there wasn't. If anything, it was hilarious because so many times we would go out to do like a goggle requal, like, all right, I need so many hours of goggles, whatever. And we'd see the Black Hawk on deck and we'd be like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we're requalling goggles. We're like, on deck? Like
You're not in flight? Yeah.
They would just sit there in the aircraft spinning. And like, I don't know if like, maybe it was just every time we happened to see them, they just never took off because they had some issues, but they were just sitting there. And I was like, I mean, maybe it's because those warrants have like, I don't know, a gazillion flight hours and we didn't have as many. And they're like, I don't need to recall, whatever. But that's kind of the impression we got. But I didn't really work with them too much otherwise. I do have one last story
yeah, please.
From being in Kuwait. Like we had one of the leaders, I'll just leave it at that, who didn't understand napping or the importance of napping. And I know that sounds funny, right? Like, of course, but a lot of us would nap a lot. But that's because it sucks to freaking wake up at 2 a.m. and then not, I remember there was one time I was hauling ass back because it's like, the sun's going to rise soon. Like everybody, you would sprint to your rack to be inside before the sun rose. Like I would be dripping in sweat and have adrenaline going. It would made more sense than if your mind sees that sun actually come up, you're not falling asleep, right? Whereas you can always settle down from everything else. But one of them, we had this like all hands call, and this person called me out specifically and was like, how about you, Lieutenant Knock? Like, do you just want to nap away your whole deployment? And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah. Like, of course I do. Like,
it's shorter that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't wait to get out of here. Like, I mean, it's fun, but like sleeping's great, and you really need to have the sleep. But of course, I'm like, no. But I was just like, man, and you don't understand because you weren't the one, this person, getting up at 2 a.m. and making that flight. So I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Whatever. I'm just gonna let it go though. It's not worth fighting. Which now that I'm older, I will totally fight those fights. But yeah, when I was, only a few years in, I didn't fight those fights.
Totally fair. Okay, back to San Diego. Right?
Yeah.
What happens when you get back home? Are you an aircraft commander at this point yet, or did you?
So as soon as I got back home,
okay.
I think I got aircraft commander within the next month and a half of being home.
Beautiful.
Yeah, because like I said, I was, I'd done everything I needed to before deployment. So then the 6 months deployments was just like, hey, you've done your 2P cruise. So it's like, come home, do a couple things, get the hack board done. And pretty much at the same time coincided with the strike syllabus, which is interesting because when I first showed up, there wasn't really a strike syllabus. It was sea combat, and that was it, which means, can you vert rep and can you do SAR? Like that's what we learned in the 60 Sierra. Block 1 aircraft, very basic. And then when I did all the stuff in the NAD, I come back home and they're like, hey, strike syllabus. But it was very similar to what I was doing anyways. It was PR, personal recovery, and like CSAR and whatever. So, hey, just do this. And so I did those flights. And once I did that, I became one of the night trained people because I had been landing in the dirt for the past 6 months. So basically I was the guy along with our SWITty who would fly a lot of these nighttime flights.
And you're going back toward like Imperial. There's a couple places around San Diego where you can get a really good desert, big air quotes, desert environment to train in.
Yeah. So me and this guy, Scott Lowe, so he was the SWATI at the time, would fly a lot of these flights out east, which I loved. I loved kind of rolling in late. You could maybe go to surf in the morning, maybe get a workout in, and then come in and really, it was a long day, and you get out of there sometimes 2:30, 3 in the morning. It was like late, especially if it was summertime or something. But I liked flying the nighttime flights, and I'm not really a tactical person. Like, that's not my personality. But I was already in that mindset anyways from 6 months of, flying Kuwait and Iraq. So I was like, all right, I can do this. And so I kind of got into it. I really liked doing the low levels, through the mountains, and then come around and doing dust off landings or dusty landings, dirt landings, right? Brownouts. And I liked instructing. Like, I've always enjoyed like trying to show somebody technique and working on it myself. It's always like, how can I be better kind of thing. But the ironic thing was both J-Lo and I, one time, like, the skipper was like, you guys are never around. And both of us are like, yeah, because we're on the freaking night raid. Like, we fly every night. Like, of course we're never around. You don't see us. Because if I'm going to be leaving at 3 in the morning, I'm showing up at 3 in the afternoon. There's people who are leaving at the time. Like, yeah, of course you don't see me. So, but yeah, so I did that. And then I did that probably for like 7 or 8 months, I think. And with the USNS Bridge coming up, which I was going to be the AOIC for that one, which was a U.S. Navy supply ship. So for those people who don't know, it's all civilians. It's like, honestly, it's like a bunch of pirates. I don't know how many on your other podcasts people have talked about it, but those guys, it is legitimately like, if you could take people from probably what pirates were however many 100 years ago and put them on modern day ship.
Well-paid pirates, just to be clear.
Yeah, very well paid.
Very well paid.
I have a great story about that as well. So go on this, and it's going to be a 7-month. Originally, they actually said it was going to be 3.5-month vert rep. The bridge was going to stay out longer, but I was going to do a swap so another hack could go and get his time, and I could get a big job back home.
And how many aircraft are you guys bringing on the USNS? Two. Okay, so two
aircraft, of which we had a pretty high success rate of keeping both up most of the time. Like, pretty much we were always, anytime we did a vert rep, it was pretty much both of us. Like, besides that one time I mentioned earlier about the HS guys. And I think we might even had it up and they just wanted to join us and we were nice enough to let them, kind of thing. But yeah, I flew, there was 6 pilots, I think, OIC, me, and another hack. So, friend of mine, Ryan, and then, so he was like ops training or whatever. I was AOIC and something else, and then obviously there's OIC, and then 3 2Ps, and then we had our crewmen to come along with us. So I think we had 3 full crews and 2 aircraft. And so, we trained up for that, deployed in February of 11 now. Went to Hawaii on the way out, which is great. So now I'm actually getting to see some stuff, like be on a boat, go on. And then continued on with the intent of going to the Gulf and supporting. When we were en route, this is April. If I'm remind, no, that can't be right. Can't be. We'd have to look it up because it was freezing out. Because I remember there was snow, and I remember need to relook at if our torque decreases by 20%, I will lose my ability to auto or whatever, because if there's icing or whatever, because we were flying around Japan. So whenever the Tomodachi happened, gosh, when was the tsunami? But the tsunami hits, and we were en route. And I remember them being like, okay, we might go support it. I don't know. And then, yep, we're supporting it, right? And so we start going that way. And so to support it, the first thing is, well, what are we going to do? Let's just go look for people. And I remember when we first showed up, there was houses just floating in the ocean, and you're like, what the hell is going on? It was crazy. I don't think words can describe the craziness of what after effects of a tsunami look like, especially with the terrain of Japan. It being kind of like California, or probably more equivalent to more like the Northwest in Washington or Oregon or something, where you have these cliffs, right? But along these cliffs, they were gradual enough where there could be the people that lived, right? So what would happen is you would see utter destruction to a level, and then total normal, like normal houses and roads and cars above that. So it was like bombs went off all along the shoreline, but then above that certain line, that threshold, everything was normal. It was totally bizarre. So anyway, so we were like trucking in, and they're like, hey, just start doing SAR, and then we'll probably start doing supply runs. So, we start looking for people, and, I remember they're like, all right, you're going to, you got to have your dry suit, but we got to have our CPR ready for some reason. I'm like, why do we need CPR ready? Like, Fukushima, we didn't know much about it at the time.
Sorry, let me unpack CPR, chemical, biological, radiological gear. Okay.
Right.
So someone knew. Someone must have been thinking a little bit ahead if they thought to have you flying. That stuff is miserable to fly.
Yeah, and the gear that we had wasn't, at the time, probably the type you would actually fly in. I think it was just like what you would just wear, on the ship or something.
Yeah. Big difference.
Because I remember I was on the first call, I think. And so I remember like waking up and it was like sitting at my door. And I was like, what the heck? What is this?
Like the package of this gear just sitting at your...
And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? So we, take off and we go and look for people. I didn't have any rescues, but we delivered a bunch of supplies to wherever there was, the Japanese people, for the most part, along the borders had, or like wherever the destruction was, had put X's, like giant X's, so of where they wanted us to land to deliver stuff.
What kind of stuff were you delivering from the USNS?
For the most part, water was huge, and then any kind of like basic snack food thing that we could have that was, packaged, right? Not taking ice cream or anything like that.
No. Yeah, essentials. Yeah.
Yeah. But the number one requested item, which I don't know how we found this out, but the number one requested item was female and baby products, of which we had nothing, right? So they wanted tampons, they wanted diapers, wipes. So we didn't have that.
Yeah,
but
I don't always think about those essentials.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right. But we would take what we could. I do remember one time there was like, I felt so bad because I remember like bringing in supplies, and it was this tight LZ, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, we're in the trees, we're going to come in, and it was freezing out. And I remember like coming down into the zone, and I look over and I see these people with a fire, and I'm like, oh no. Because I was like, they have this awesome fire and everything, and we're coming down, and sure enough, like right before we land, you see, because it was like, must have been some kind of, not a bucket but it was definitely some kind of fire pit, and you just see the thing go just like shoot off into the distance, and like luckily the fire goes out and doesn't just start a fire. But I'm like, are they actually thankful because we just put out their hard work for the fire? But they did. They always seem to be like thankful. You hand off the water and all this.
Well, you mentioned that, were you able to interact a lot? I'm sure there's a bit of a language barrier there, but were you able to actually speak to the folks?
Yeah, well, shoot, I was always in. Actually, I know I got out. I think I got out a couple times to like hand things off, but like, helicopter's loud. No, it was pretty much usually just, here you go, that's it. And there was really there was guidance enough of like, hey, take to these certain areas, but it was really just, if you saw somebody, go, like, which was kind of awesome too, because it was like, fly along, you're flying along, you just see a random giant ship on a shore, how'd that get there? But stuff was, looks like it's been bombed, and then all of a sudden there's some people there, and you're like, oh, cool, maybe they need us. We show up, and sure enough, it always seemed like they were eager to get that stuff. And then when we worked our way towards like more populated areas, like giant, soccer fields or something, there were delivered X's in those areas when we would coordinate with the carrier, which was Reagan. And at the time, those areas seemed to have a little bit more of a plan, or somebody was coordinating something. So like we would get specific, like, hey, go to this area or something like that.
And you mentioned a plan. Are there Hawkeyes out doing ATC?
There was,
so you're working with other Navy aircraft.
Yeah, in fact, I remember one of the times where I was going to be late coming back, the Hawkeye's like, hey, we're out of here. You're like, you guys are on your own. I was like, okay. Like, so that was the one time where it was like nighttime, freezing cold. And we had like taken supplies a little bit further than maybe the range should have been. And I just remember like, oh, well, if we hit the water, nobody's going to freaking know about it. But, we made it back fine. So it was good. Oh, but going back to like Fukushima, hilarious, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, there's no nuclear plume. Everything's fine. We're like, yeah, cool. And like, to be honest, like we probably would have gone anyways, right? Even if we had known, but we didn't know. And then we get back after multiple runs, and they're like, yeah, and there's like people on our ship. I'm like, who are these guys? Like, how'd they even get here? Right? And they're like, they have Geiger counters and they're like checking us out, and they're like taking people's boots and like throwing them away, and, like put them in a bag. Took my boss and they threw them in the tank and sprayed them down with salt, seawater. And we're like, what is going on? And then we had to take the iodide pills, and then to get our thyroids checked out. And then we had to actually have a radiation health officer join the ship to like monitor us. And so after this is a series of days of us, and we went back and forth to the Reagan for supplies as well. And we went to Japan, and all 3 crews and on both aircraft did multiple runs, like over the however many days before we found out that there was actually radiation. So then we went to Sasebo, put our ship in port, and basically had to like try and deradiate the ship. The Reagan continued because they're like, we're all military, you guys suck it up. But all my civilian counterparts, all these pirates, right, were like, F this, we're not working anymore. Like, they threw a big stink to the point where literally the admiral in charge of all, military sea lift command had to come to our ship and like talk them off a ledge. And he was like, hey, I know, and by the way, the ship was 100 miles off the coast. Like, they weren't the ones getting radiated. Me and my buddies in the aircraft were the ones. But the admiral shows up and he's like, hey, just to thank you guys for what you did, all this whole radiation thing, all of you get $1,000. And we're like, yeah, this is awesome. He's like, whoa. No, not you military guys. Just these guys are like, wait, we're the ones who actually flew through this and we're getting nothing? He's like, yeah, you guys will get an award or something. They're getting $1,000. It's like, and then of course the civilians who, because also they were going to the radiation health officers being like, I think I have another head growing out of my neck. Like they're making all this crap up. And the radiation health officer is really there for us, to check us out. But I was like, man, those guys. But spent the time in Sasebo, 30 days, which was a long time, which was interesting because during that time we actually had to take the helicopters off in port in Sasebo to be able to like.
Are you at anchor when this is happening, or are you alongside?
No, we were at anchor in Sasebo. We had to get like special permission to do.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
So we did that, and but then finally after the 30 days, we were able to continue on and finally start heading to the Gulf, of which we basically would support the Reagan. So we weren't attached to the Reagan Strike Group, but we would supply them more than any other ship. We would pretty much within a week or two, one of the great things about being on a supply ship is we would always go into Fujairah, and, I would get my, land time, get off the ship, go have a drink or something like that, feel like a normal person in the best way you could. And then we would jump on the ship and then continue.
For folks that don't understand the vert rep mission, so what can you just kind of maybe talk me through a day in the life? You're on this, it's a smaller supply ship, right? You got a flight deck and the aft end of the ship, the back end of the ship.
It's actually to be honest, so the USNS Bridge is only about 300 people, but if you were to see, it's of course not the full on total weight or capacity of a carrier, but if you were to see them lengthwise next to each other, it's pretty close. Like,
really?
Yeah, the USNS Bridge was a pretty long ship because it's holding a lot of fuel because it's delivering all the fuel to the carrier as well, right? So vert rep during the unrep, which is the underway replenishment, at sea you have the carrier and then you have this supply ship, and the supply ship gets right next to each, right? And then they shoot these shotguns across with the lines, and they start getting everything across from ship to ship of what it can happen that way. Of course certain things can't, like missiles, ice cream, mail, the important things. So we would take off, and we would know it was going to happen obviously the day before, right? So tomorrow's going to be a vert rep day. And I loved vert rep days. Those were my favorite type of flying I've ever done. 8 hours in the aircraft could feel like, go by in a second because it was just so much fun. It's all stick and rudder. It's just like you're really flying the aircraft. So you'd wake up, I feel like it was like 3 a.m. or something, because you take off if it was the middle of the summer, which, by the time we were probably doing some of this, the summer was starting, sunrise is like 5, and you had to be taking off so that you could be starting at sunrise. So I usually would take off on goggles at like 4 something, whatever it was, right? And both of us needed to be airborne. So one of us would take off, then the other one would take off, and then we're both ready to go the moment sunrise is happening. And in the moment, obviously the unwrap actually is happening and they give us the green deck. And then so what we would do, and I don't usually talk with my hands too much, but if you could see me, I'm definitely talking with my hands when I talk about vert rep. What we would do is you would come into the back of the supply ship and you would pick up whatever it is. So I would fly in, and we talked about side flare. So you kind of screaming towards the back of the ship with your nose down, speeding up. And then when you get to where you kind of know it's about time, you push the nose up and you start to, let that fan slow you down. And then you kick the rudder and you slide in sideways, and hopefully you're ending up right 10 feet over the deck, right over where that load is. And one of our people from our military deck would usually be hooking up the load via this, silicone impregnated eye, in case you cared, because it's something I had to learn back when. But basically this big, cable that would hook onto the bottom of the aircraft, and then you lift up. So as we're sliding in, the crewman might be saying something like, right 3, 2, 1, down 1, loads hooked up. Like, that's a good one, right? And loads hooked up. All right, clear to come up, or, whatever, guys clear to come up. And as you start to come up, checking the power and everything, and then you would usually at that time swap controls. Because if I was the right seat pilot, for example, sliding in to pick up the control or pick up the load in the right seat, well, if the carrier is now to the left, we're going to swap ends for the helicopter, right? So we loads hooked up, and now we start to nose it over. He's got the controls now, and so literally, because it's not a far distance, because the ships are so close, as we start to nose it over, he has the controls. He's immediately basically kicking right rudder, so we can start to bring the tail back around. And so he's going to slide back around and then basically be facing back towards the ship we came from, right? So basically doing a 180. And then you're about over the deck, down to 1, whatever, loads released and clear, right? So, and at that exact same time as hopefully I'm dropping a load, or my aircraft's dropping a load, the guy is picking up a load. My partner in the other aircraft is picking up a load from the USNS Bridge. And then he's going to go direct straight across and do the spin I just talked about. Well, as we're going to kind of scoop around like a little U to come back around and then pick up the load from the bridge and then go again. So it's like a dance of the two of us aircraft going back and forth for as fast as we can, as safe as we can, but as fast as we can, and just dropping the loads. And it is so much fun. It is just awesome because you're both flying, which is great, and it's both nonstop flying, switching back and forth, and you're doing it with another aircraft, and you're doing it with the ships, and it's all happening at once. And then the best part about it all is the ice cream run, because they take it so serious, especially in the middle of summer, because you're talking like 110 degrees or whatever it is more on the flight deck. So their coordination for ice cream between these two ships is like epic, because they're like, all right, is the carrier ready to receive the ice cream? Yes. Is the bridge ready to deliver? Are the aircraft ready? Like, there's more concentration for that one item than anything, because you have some sailors that want their freaking ice cream. So they're like, all right, here we go. And then they like open the freezer doors, and this, little pickup, forklift is driving as fast as it can to the back. And then we're like coming in as it's like driving in, we're sliding in to like take it off right from there and then immediately drop it off the deck as fast as you can. And then they're doing the same thing. It's like, did the ice cream make it? Yes, it made it. That's more important than all the bombs or whatever we deliver. So.
We'll beat on the guy that pickles the ice cream into the Gulf of...
oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly, right. I'm lucky in that I never actually had to pickle anything, but I definitely came very, very close. And it was because it was nighttime, bad weather, and it was a swinging load.
So wait, you would rip at night?
Yeah.
No way. I thought this was a day-only evolution.
Nope. Yeah, we definitely got into it, which is especially funny because we learned at the FRS, or maybe first at 23, not on goggles, right? It was you vert repped at night, unaided.
Okay.
And then they're like, we're going to start doing it with goggles. And I was like, oh, no, I don't need goggles, blah, blah. Like, I don't need goggles. I do it without it. And then it's like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, goggles help. I'm still looking under the goggles anyways when I'm over the deck. And when I'm away from it, the goggles are helpful. But yeah, so it wasn't that we would do these mass loads, like, just repetition of vert rep. It was usually some specific thing, and maybe the timing was such that these ships would only be close at night when they're passing by each other, and that's why that item had to be delivered, right? So I don't even remember what it is that we had to deliver, but it was nighttime and the weather was bad, And I think we had done a couple things, but this one, I remember it just started swinging. And it was swinging enough where the aircraft was like up, down. Like you could feel the aircraft really getting moved by it. So what do you do with a swinging load? You pull power, right? Because if you pull power, it's going to tighten it all up. But as soon as you pull power, you know what we would do? Go into the clouds. So because the layer was like at 1,000 feet. So it was like into the clouds. Oh, F that, right? Drop the collective, back out of the clouds, swinging load. So it was like up into the clouds, back out of the clouds. So it was like, this is the stupidest thing ever. Like, why are we doing this? Like, because we're going to make ourselves get vertigo. We're going to be all kinds of confused. And so finally I was like, I'm getting rid of it. Because I was a hack, right? I was like, I'm done. I'm getting rid of it. And like, I had like one final plan where I was like, hey, to the ship, I was like, as long as I have some airspeed on the aircraft, it's like not so bad. It was like every time I try and slow up to deliver it is when it would really go crazy. So I was like, hey, I'm thinking I could just, I can't remember what the item is, but like if it can handle maybe a longer drop, I might just fly closer and then like slow down just enough and just pickle it over the deck and see what we can salvage kind of thing, which once again was probably pretty stupid. But literally like as I was on final, everything just kind of calmed down and I was able to actually save it. So, but yeah, that was probably the closest I came to pickling it. And it was probably, I remember my co-pilot, a friend of mine, Bo, he was saying like, that was really stupid. I was like, yeah. There were some other times I flew with Bo. He's like, that was really stupid. Not because I was stupid, but things happened. Like we landed with low on gas one time. I mean, it was once again, it was vert repping. So like the ship was right there, but it was definitely like, we probably didn't need to do that one extra one or whatever it was. So.
Well, you mentioned ice cream. What other ice cream, bombs, water? It sounds like I'm always curious to hear what
mail.
Okay,
obviously,
lots of mail.
Super important mail. Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of times I don't even know what I was getting.
Do you get a weight at all, or you just know it's going to be in a certain range?
We definitely know. So we knew it was within the range, within our capacities for the day, and the things that were usually going to exceed it were only bombs. 5,000-pound bombs would be the one that we would need to wait for. Yeah, like was it 5 or 3,000-pound bombs? But I don't know.
Okay,
I can't remember.
But I was going to say if it's 5 1,000 pounders, I assume it's 5K, right?
No, I think it was like
really?
Literally like giant ones, or like not a JSF engine because we didn't have JSFs, but there was like certain engines that were really big as well.
Wow.
That were heavy. It's been 11 years. So I don't remember exactly, but there was definitely ones where it had to be when we were lower on gas.
Into the cycle.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that we'd have the power and everything. So those were specific. Everything else we kind of knew that it was going to be in the range and we were going to be okay. Yeah, but that was the best flying. I will say one of the best stories I have from vert rep wasn't actually vert repping. It was, but we were vert repping. And then the carrier is like, hey, we're going to go red deck. And we're like, okay, cool. So we'll stand off and we're going to go cloud surf, right? Because what else? You got some time, so let's go surf some clouds. And they're going to be red deck for a little bit. And I can't remember the reason, but we're like, cool. So we went up and we're like climbing up and we went pretty high and we're having some fun in the clouds. And, as a physiologist, I can talk about this now. In fact, it's one of the stories I'll tell when we talk about gases expanding. Was my crewman was like, hey, I need to go to the bathroom, and I was like, okay, why? Oh, he's like, just get a pee. I'll slow down. I'll go straight in level. He's no. Like, I need to take it up. And I was like, okay. So I'll call a carrier like, hey, you guys going green deck? They're like, red deck, like, that's it. They're not letting us land. And he's like, this is an emergency. Like, and, because we had been going up, his intestines were expanding. He needed to get it out. And so he's like, this is an emergency. Like, I got to go. And I was like, all right, cool. So, hey, carrier, like, this is kind of an emergency. Like, do you have an emergency? We're like, well, no, not really. It's like red deck. And I was like, sorry, bro. So, of course, like before I could even say anything, this is the crewman. He's unzipping his flight suit, taking his flight bag, and just immediately relieving himself at the back of it. And like, as he's doing it, they're like, green deck. And we're like, doesn't matter. Like, too late.
Too late at this point.
We're like, we don't need it. And I remember he zipped up his bag and just threw it out the side of the aircraft. Like, never want to see that again. Like, he's not even going to try and clean that up. Like, don't care about that bag ever again. So.
Yeah, that's. I've had a crewman use a Pringles can in the back of a helicopter, and when we would tow, I mean, you get to fly a little bit with some of the 53 guys. You're in forward flight, but you're maybe 15, 20 knots. Not a lot of forward flight, and it's probably 110 in the Gulf, super high humidity. So I remember just smelling it. I was actually flying, and I remember smelling, and I'm like, no, that's not what I think it is.
Yeah.
And it's wafting forward.
He didn't even tell you?
No. Oh, no. He's in front of the console, and it's funny. So we were towing a queue. So there's the sonar, the HSO, DAO. I remember the terms, but the two sonar operators there, and they're like basically kind of quietly pointing to him, so we can't hear him. Like, get in front of the console. We don't want to smell that stuff. So he's in front of the console, and then I'm like, wait, what is this? And I'm not going to mention his name. And I was like, damn it, man. Went right out the ramp. And thankfully, it's probably still floating around the Gulf right now. But, not pleasant.
No.
Yeah. Cool. Any more fun on the use of the bridge, USNS Bridge, right?
USNS Bridge. No good stories.
What a way to see the world, though. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, so I saw Dubai,
big city.
Fujar, not much
to see there, yeah.
And then, Hawaii, Maui, I saw a couple things there. But we unfortunately didn't get like any, in Japan, obviously. I was in Sasebo, and while we were in Sasebo for 30 days, we were able to jump on the train and go, I went to the Hiroshima, and got to explore a little bit of that area.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right, cool. You're back in San Diego. What happens next? Where are you going next?
Yeah, so I didn't get to come home at 3.5 months like I was hoping. I came home at 7 months, which as a result put me into September when I was rolling in December. So I didn't really have but 3 months for a big job, which I didn't have much time for a big job.
Gentleman of the mess, basically.
Yeah, which I couldn't complain.
No,
especially because I was gone for 13 months of basically the first 2 years of my marriage. So spent time. My wife and I did a coast trip and hit every national park you could between here and Washington, basically, over the course of a few weeks, and then came home. And then just kind of flew until, found out, I think when I was actually on debt, I wanted to come back to Pensacola to be VTs, HGs. And I didn't get a spot. And I was like, what? I was really surprised by it. In fact, when I got back, a lot of people at the squadron were like, I don't know. I'm sorry, man, But it was actually a blessing because they're like, hey, you can have Station SAR or you can have Panama City. And I was like, Panama City? I knew a guy who had gone to Panama City, but why would I want to go to Panama City? But then I called him up and I was like, hey, I could go here. Tell me about the job. And when he told me, I was like, oh, sweet. I want that. Not that I had any interest in towing. No offense.
None taken.
If anything, I went to kill all of the towing projects for the 60 because I thought they belonged with the 53, as you, I'm sure, agree.
I agree entirely with you, yes.
Yeah, so it was more because of the lifestyle. Let's be honest, Gulf Coast, flying 60 Sierras, dive school, you've got all the divers there. And other than that, there's not much going on. There's Tyndall Air Force Base, but that's east of there. So it's really not a military central town there in a way. To half the time, even people on base, when I would run into them, they'd be like, oh, what do you do? I'm a helicopter pilot. Oh, do you miss flying? I'm like, no, I fly. We're out of here on base. I'm like, which I don't understand how they didn't know, because one of the coolest things about Panama City, which hopefully this doesn't get me in trouble, it was years ago, the base CO wanted us to do random anti-terrorism measures, right, RAM. And he's like, I want you guys to fly over the base every day as fast as you can, as low as you can. And we're like, okay. So literally every day, part of when we would take off to go do a mission or something, beginning and end of it, I would just fly as fast as I could and just swoop over the base back and forth. I'm sure the divers all hated us. But I'm like, how do you not know that I fly on base when I'm doing this every day?
There's helicopters here.
Obviously, they're all these are the, engineering nerds that are inside of some deep, because there's some secret stuff going on in Panama City. But yeah, it was such an awesome thing because it was all right. So I would basically do a lap, fly low over the base as fast as I could, and then throw on the brakes and kind of scoop it back over the water, which was on the northeast side, and then kind of come in and practice my vert rep and come in and land. And then I would do that with all the 53 guys too, because I was like, hey, this is how you side flare, this is how you do energy management. And I'd show them all these times, it's not just the side flare, you can fly in that same profile almost consistently. You could do what would be right before you finish a sight flare, where your nose is down, a pirouette kind of thing. You can maintain that going around. Imagine a box pattern but tighter. If you were flying a helo in a box pattern and working around the edges, you can do that and have the energy on and it feel totally comfortable and safe if you know how to do it right. So we would do that kind of stuff, and it was interesting because it was a lot of times there was not missions to do in Panama City, right? The purpose of me being there was I was supposed to be the Sierra guy for this, being that I was the NATOPS guy, right? I'm going to be the one who makes sure we're standardized on NATOPS 60 Sierra stuff, and you 53 guys that I flew with were going to be the SMEs for towing and all the possible missions that we're trying to incorporate in this area, of which I know zero about. But a lot of times when I showed up, there wasn't a lot of testing to be had. So it was like, hey, here's the keys. Go fly, stay current. So I'd take off, do the fun laps like I talked about. Usually fly along the beach, check out the spring breakers, fly over my house, say hey to my wife, because this is all uncontrolled airspace, right?
It is. Yeah.
And then go land at Florala, get a burrito, and then call it a day. It was the best 3 years of my life. Like, could not complain during that time at all.
But I don't want to undersell it, because in addition to supporting the testing stuff, and I want to get into that, you also did SAR stuff as well, right? So it's multiple facets to the mission. Yeah,
so that was one of the things that I really wanted to incorporate when I was showing up was, luckily there was like hints of the idea of it starting, but like, I was the SAR officer at 23, and when I showed up here, I was like, hey, we can do more SAR. So I started calling the Coast Guard every week, sometimes even daily, just to be like, hey, do you guys have a need for us? And so the cool thing was they were like cool with it. Like they were interested in it, because if you think about, Mobile is an FRS essentially. It's not really a rescue location. New Orleans is. And then you have Clearwater. So between the two is this big expanse. So once I started calling them, and we stood up our SAR program, and I made sure that we all met all the requirements that I had to do exactly I had done in 23. And then we even started getting SAR evaluated during this time to make sure that we were good. And so like I had extra time too, right? Like all we did was fly. So I would we would practice a lot of SAR. Like I thought it was fun, so we would do it a lot. And so then we started getting calls, and we actually got a decent amount of calls. And the cool thing about the one time I did get a call with the rescue, it doesn't sound that glamorous until you realize that we had gotten basically the exact same call a month or less earlier, of which we never found the person, and no one ever did. So because it was a kayaker who was lost from Pensacola, actually, the one that we didn't find. So the last time they saw him was going out the pass, had his dog with him in a kayak, right? So if the dog gets out and then you go after the dog and then you lose the paddle, and then if it's north wind, you're just getting blown. And so we got called multiple times for things, and there were certain things that we did come across, like a ship. And usually we've had time we'd come across a ship that was maybe taking on water or something. Another ship would be pulling up, so that was actually the better suited person or whatever it is. But the one I did get a call for, I wasn't even in the aircraft. Blaine Cardinell actually was flying, 53 guy with a 53 guest pilot. Like, you guys were visiting us, some 53s were visiting, and we would always try and give you guys good deal flights in the 60. And so, the call got made, like, hey, we were having a SAR. So like, of course I ran out to the aircraft and kicked the 53 guy out. And then we jumped in with, two of my favorite crewmen. And, we just, of course, hauled ass out there. And it's interesting because, I always thought like, you kind of hear like, oh, you can't really see as well or whatever, or something that you think would be obvious isn't obvious. And sure enough, this bright kayak, because it was a lost kayaker, I mean, we were flying over top of it and I didn't even see it. I had no freaking clue. And like my crewman was like, there he is. And like, oh yeah, there he is. Like, holy crap. And so sure enough, we circle back around and the dude's, sitting in the water with his arms up on the kayak with no paddle, and he can't get himself back in the kayak. And the wind's out of the north. And so like, you'd think that boats would see him or something eventually, but obviously it wasn't the case in some other cases. So he's floating out to sea. And so we circled back around, jumped in my swimmer swims up to him. And this is what I hear from him, basically, is how it went. He kind of swam up to the guy and was like, hey, you doing okay? He's like, not really. He's like, do you want to come with us? He's like, yeah. Like it was that was pretty much the conversation. So we picked him up, called into one of the Coast Guard boats to come pick up the kayak where it was, and then took him back. And, of course, like, I don't know how the word got out, but of course, as we're landing, like news cameras were there and stuff. But it felt good, It's funny that I get, of all my places I was in, San Diego, like being on the boat and all that my rescue is actually in Panama City Beach for just some random kayaker. So
that's awesome, though.
But yeah,
it's got to be a great feeling.
Yeah, it was. So I got my Sikorsky,
rescue patch.
So.
Very cool. Talking about the testing mission, so you did you guys have any 53s there still, or was it all Sierras at the time?
No, all Sierras.
So Bucky was gone. That was the one Ranger weird 53 that I think was
and no Hueys either.
The Huey was gone.
I was so disappointed because my dad being a Navy Huey guy, obviously I wanted to fly Hueys. My OIC, Bill Gibson was his name, a 53 guy, and he was in Panama City as a JO, and then also now as the OIC. So as OIC, it was like a post-department head type job, and he talked about flying the Huey all the time. I was like so jealous because, my old man had talked about it, doing the autos with the doors off and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I didn't get to do that, but we just had the 60 Sierras, 2 of them, civilian maintenance, 5 pilots, I think like 6 or 7 air crewmen, and then like a couple of Navy enlisted, a couple chiefs and a couple of maintainers, but otherwise it was really civilian maintenance, and that was it. Like that was our debt. So it was like my deployment debt, except for even smaller, and then on shore command with nobody in charge of us because our overall boss was Naval Surface Warfare Command. So it was a Navy SWO captain who cared nothing in a good way about us. He basically was like, Bill, you got it, to the OIC. And so we kind of, as long as we kept our nose clean, we could do whatever we wanted to do. And he was also really cool. He even let us do a hail and bail where we flew in along the beach because the divers were also part of our unit. And we would jump all the divers out, and they, as part of a reenlistment, and the divers all swam up on shore to this bar in Panama City. And then we went back and landed the helos and then all walked in, and that was a great time. Probably can't do that stuff as much anymore.
I doubt it, yeah. Well, and then you mentioned that, the unit is gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I know, which is so sad because that was like the best kept secret in naval aviation.
But the original, so kind of going back, you mentioned the Huey, you talked about the 53. The reason that's a special place for AMCM is that's where a lot of our underwater systems are tested, developed, maintained.
Yeah.
There's still a sled there for the Mark 105, a sled. Oh, good Lord. It's the Mark 105 sled. There's a ramp. The ramp still exists. There's a little tower there, a couple spots on the flight line. I got to go on a jet there once for a month. We were testing a new version of the Q-24 Charlie. What were the systems that you guys were, because you're not supporting the 53 at this point. You guys are trying
we were
to
doing our own stuff. So
integrate these things into the 60.
So, there's obviously developmental testing and operational testing. What am I missing? There's another one there, but
experimental test maybe.
So anyways, certain things require a test pilot. So I would do certain things with the test pilot when those programs were new. AMIDS, AM&S and AMIDS. AM&S is like
Airborne Mine Neutralization System.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And AMIDS is like Airborne Line Lower Laser.
AMIDS looks for stuff. AM&S neutralizes
lasers,
stuff.
Yeah. One's lasers. One's basically you drop this pod in and it shoots out these little, what do you
looks like a Hellfire missile, basically, that swims through the water.
Yeah, it swims through the water until you find something and you blow it up. The laser is this big sweep of a laser, a fan that goes into the water to search, right? There was other programs that were kind of dying as I was showing up that they also, like the tow, like specifically towing a sled.
With a Sierra,
of which luckily they failed the engine multiple times, I think on an Admiral in the simulators to show that you would die every time. And he's like, oh yeah, we should probably get rid of that. So we got rid of it, thank goodness.
And that's the reason the 53 does it, right? We have 3 motors. If you bag a motor, you usually have just enough to get, pickle that loader.
Right, but the 60 Sierra, no way.
No, not a chance.
But AM&S and AMIDS, but even still, whatever. I think it was just so much money was into them. But anyways, when they were developmental testing, I would fly with a test pilot, and I pretty much would fly the whole time while he would write notes. So somebody from Pax River would come down. If it was operational testing, it didn't have to be a test pilot, so we could fly those missions specifically to basically say, hey, go do this, go do that kind of thing. It's like HX1 was more test pilots and VX was more of the operational testing.
Fleet
it's like kind of like that.
Yeah,
and I would be like with both of those guys, but often VX wouldn't really come down because we didn't need them. Only HX would we need the test pilot. We could do the OT type stuff. So we would do this, but these missions, I would fly the laser mission. Often it was like profiles, right? Like, okay, so with the laser, how are we going to fly to detect mines with this laser? And it was awful. I have to be perfectly honest. Like,
I know.
like flying at night with these patterns at like around 55 knots, which, hey, guess what? Our AFCS is kicking on and off right around that airspeed. So you'd be flying it with your autopilot constantly like wanting to engage. And then and so the aircraft's like jerking around and you're flying this tight little like maze pattern on your screen. Well, at night on goggles, it was so dumb, like vertigo inducing for sure. But it was cool to see this giant laser, coming off of you. Although it was a bad laser, and we didn't fly with laser eye protection. I remember being like, "Shouldn't we fly with laser eye protection?" They're like, "No, it's projected below us. There's never any risk." And of course, like I remember, like the next flight, like we hit some clouds and like bounced off the clouds like right back into us. I was like, "Yeah, see, that's why we should probably be wearing laser eye protection." So that was the ALMAs, and then the AM&S. It was kind of cool occasionally to like when we'd actually sit down, in a hover, lowered in, and watch the video, because it was usually a civilian, tech rep or whatever, I don't know what their title was, that was flying it, but we could have it on the screen just like you would have a FLIR up.
A repeater, basically.
Yeah, and we could see him, and he'd be driving it through the water and come through and actually explode, whatever the mine.
And for those that might wonder, the reason Panama City exists, it's not because it's some garden spot for the Navy, though it kind of is. Yeah. It's because the water is so clear. Yeah. And you need to have that sterile, pristine environment to do that testing in.
A lot of the testing up near, I think, Maryland and, Virginia, the waters were murky, or not the conditions they want.
Strong currents, too.
Yeah. And so that was done down there. And so that was kind of like why we existed, right? Was to be supplemental. So if the Pax River guys did want to come down, or if we could do the OT ourselves, and we did. And we would do other testing too. I mean, like I remember doing wireless ICS, WICS, testing. Like, so there was random Pax River stuff they would throw our way too, just to be supportive, I guess. Because a lot of times it was like, hey, we don't have much towing for you, which, we're fine. Or mine countermeasure stuff, which, once again, like I said, I was fine with it. But having said that, I did try and play the mine countermeasure role to my advantage, because I was like, oh, if this is going to the fleet, hey, I can be a super JO, but of course, I guess they had done that times before and it never came to fruition. So they're like, we're not doing that anymore. And sure enough, like right after I leave, Bacon actually was at HSC, where was he at, 2, I think, when I was like, well, I was still there, and he was like asking me questions, or people at 2 were asking me all these questions. I'm like, so it is showing up, like you guys are doing it, but they didn't have a need for me to come and be a Super J or anything like that, which whatever, it's fine.
How many years at Panama City?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
At the end of that 3 years, where were you angling to go? Where could you have gone?
Yeah. So, obviously I was up for my disassociated sea tour, and I'll do a little backtracking in a second, but basically I was dealing with the detailer, and I had already decided that I wanted to be a physiologist. So how did I come upon that? So I'll backtrack, and then I'll come back to what the future held. But basically I was the NATOPS instructor, right? So got the NI back in San Diego, came here, and made sure to keep up to date on stuff. So 3710, I recognized there were certain requirements that we weren't meeting. So I called Pensacola, the Survival Training Center, and said, hey, can you send over a physiologist to do all this training? So we're meeting 3710. So they send over a physiologist, and so he shows up, and he's teaching the class, and he has NFO wings on, and I'm like, what's this about, man? Like, I thought you were a physiologist. Like he's like, yeah, I am. I was an NFO first, now I'm a physiologist. And I'm like, well, what does it entail? Tell me more about this, right? And this is like halfway through my tour, maybe, like a year and a half in. And so I was like, this is amazing, because I have a passion for health, fitness, nutrition, my wife as well. Like that's like something that we always are reading about and doing research on our own time anyways. The brain, the body, like how's this stuff work? And so I was like, we have to go hang out, right? Let's go talk. So we go and have a beer afterwards, and I just picked his brain, this and this and this. And so I'm like lighting up with interest with all the things he's talking about, because I love flying. I love aviation, but I didn't always love my ground job. And so he was describing it in a way which I've come to find it's not always perfect, but now being a physiologist, I see that basically I still luckily get to be in aviation, but my ground job is different. So that's what's changed, is my ground job now is aviation physiology, which I have an interest in, right? It's human performance. It's, it's still the mind, it's still the body. So it's these things that I have an interest in. So I was like, well, what did you do to be able to be qualified, right? So most physiologists, so the official title is Naval Aerospace and Operational Physiologist. I like to put that little plug for operational because people forget it's not just aviation. We actually do a lot with like high altitude parachute stuff, HAPS, right? So halo type things. Marines, people can go to jump school, and then I have a friend, that was my intern with me, and he went to jump school, right, and got his jump wings and jumps with the Marines all the time. So there's other parts of it, but anyways, Naval Aerospace Operational Physiologist is the person who's going to teach all of the appropriate physiology stuff. So we have our flight surgeons, right, who are going to be into, are you able to fly with this specific, ailment, illness, injury, etc. Right? I don't deal with that world. I do deal with human performance in the regard of like how that might affect you and talk about that stuff. I can't up people, but I can down people. People actually didn't know that, but I can. I could actually down you. So if I see you doing something you shouldn't be doing, like drinking 8 cups of coffee before you go fly, like, hey, I'm downing you, but I couldn't up you. But our job is more education on the physiology and the effects of flying, right? So high altitude hypoxia stuff, G tolerance, spatial disorientation, we do dynamic hypoxia training, we do air sickness, right? All of these things. And often we're the gear guys too, because it's kind of just fallen into our laps. So anyways, he's telling me about his ground job is now this basically, but he still gets to be part of aviation. I was like, this is amazing. So what do we have to do? Well, most of the physiologists that come in off the street, so out of 100 of us physiologists in the Navy, which is not much, I would say somewhere around 90 are probably PhD master's types, okay, or doctor, some type of, so there's like PhDs, there's doctor of chiropractic, we even have MDs, and then we have masters. And those are the people who came in to the Navy to be a physiologist. Then there's probably around 10 of us, I'd have to look at the specific number, that are former pilots or NFOs. And the reason they allow us in the community, which I'm thankful that they do, because we're not as smart as they are, but is that we have some practical background to speak to, right? So they want us to have a heavy science background and a significant amount of flight time. Well, as I already mentioned, I was an economics major, but the good thing about the academy is it's a BS. I was a Bachelor of Science in economics. So I had chemistry, even though I sucked at it, 1 and 2, physics, math, statistics, all these engineering courses. So I went and looked up what the prerequisites would be to get a master's in kinesiology or physiology and then get back in. So that was ultimately what I thought was probably what I needed to do. But I was still going to try and apply while I was in the Navy, with the intent that maybe they would pick me up. And in order to do that, I was going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I was going to go back to school and get the prerequisites I would need to apply for the physiology program in the Navy, and also to apply for a physiology master's. So I went to the local community college in Panama City. I took organic chemistry, which I did way better than I had done, with regular chemistry. And I took anatomy and physiology. So over the course of a few semesters, I did these classes. And so I put in my application for a lateral transfer to the medical service corps to be an aerospace physiologist. At the same time, I was negotiating orders with my detailer, and I was very clear. I was like, hey, I want to be a physiologist at this point. We'll probably have to get out in order to do it, meaning I'm willing to take the off the beaten path job, And as far as preferences go, I don't want a carrier and I don't want Norfolk. And she writes back, cool, I have a carrier out of Norfolk for you. And I was like, obviously you didn't hear anything I said. So I was like, no. Like, okay, maybe if that's all there is, whatever. But like, I don't care about the career path. Like, I am getting out. Like, I've already applied. Like, I've shot myself in the foot, right? I'm going to have to do something else. And still she didn't hear me. And finally, like, look, please, like, I want to do something that maybe would help me, right? To human performance, whatever. And she's like, well, I do have this job in Coronado to be the SEAL group, not SEAL team. So group, like it would be like a wing over squadrons are. So group over the teams. SEAL group aviation, rep basically. So like coordinating with squadrons to do flights. I was like, yeah, of course, naturally, of course I want that job. So that's actually where I was going back from my disassociated with to San Diego. And that was going to be in January of 2015. And, but I actually got picked up for physiology at the end of December of 14. So like I was literally within a couple weeks moving to San Diego, and the detailer called me up and said, hey, you got picked up for physiology. We'll let you go. And I was like, what? I was so surprised. And I mean, because originally she said, no, I'm never letting you go. You have to do it, which is fine. I had already wrapped my head around it. But HSC 84 in Norfolk, the counterpart to 85, but it was on the East Coast, flying, all that tactic stuff, FTS mission stuff. They were decomming. And so they had a bunch of people jumping ship, and they had too many people without places to go. And so I lucked out in my timing in that they were like, hey, we need your job to actually give to other people. So they just rolled it to another person and said, you're free to go. So instead of leaving for San Diego in 2 weeks, I just moved over to Pensacola and came here to do my physiology training.
Wow. Could not have worked out better.
Yeah.
What was that training like? What is the actual, how long is the course? How many weeks?
Yeah. So like my timing was different.
Okay.
So being that I was obviously a prior pilot and a helicopter guy, I had already done a lot of the flight doc stuff, right? So flight docs go through and learn fixed wing, and they fly in the helo. They didn't let me do that. Although the coolest thing was, I was like, hey, I'm a T-34 guy, never flown in the T-6. Can I fly in the T-6 as a doc? And they're like, oh yeah, we can let that happen. So I went to VT-10, flew as a doc with my college roommate who was an instructor at the 10 at the time. So I flew all my doc flights with him, and we just, went out and did our quality training
The whole time.
Yeah, yep. Exactly. But then the rest of the time I was in the Navy, what do they call it now? Medical officer course, or I can't remember, but it's basically the exact same course as all the flight surgeons go through, all of the, physician's assistants, any of the people in the medical corps, the medical service corps that are doing stuff aviation medicine related, AMO, that's what it's called, Aviation Medicine Officer course. And so I do that class. And so you learn all the ins and outs of aviation medicine. And there's certain courses that are flight surgeon specific, at which point I would step out and go to a physiology rep and who was a physiologist, and I would do specific, like the easiest way to describe it would probably be like research projects, like a college or master's level research project. Like, okay, hey, this is your topic. This is what you need to present on. Go do research. And the point was obviously to show you understood the research or the physiology that you'd been learning, and that you could present it and you could instruct it, and also argue a case. Like one of the cases I actually did was like, should we keep the chambers around? And my answer would be no.
Talk about the high altitude chambers.
Yeah.
Really? Why is that?
Well, all right. So the chambers themselves are extremely expensive to maintain.
And the Pensacola one is filled with asbestos, as I understand.
Exactly.
But, okay. So
to be actually to repair it would have been, and it was spider cracking like everywhere within it too. So it's a nightmare to actually have done. And what benefit do you get? Now, there are certain benefits, not to get too sciencey, but when I do the dynamic hypoxia trainer now, it's normobaric, meaning I don't change the pressure at all. So all I do is decrease, or I don't do it, the machine does it, decreases the percentage of oxygen that's getting delivered to you, which simulates a higher altitude oxygen concentration effect. But it's really not the same thing as actually decreasing pressure, which is hypoxia, right? So there's slight differences, and maybe you feel that. But for the most part, the effect or the symptoms are similar enough that you could recognize it from using something without going to high altitude within the chamber. What are the risks of high altitude? Well, there's barotrauma, people blowing out their eardrums. Perfectly good people now have just lost, their ears. And maybe, I mean, not forever, but maybe they lost their contract because of that barotrauma, right? And then, there could be decompression sickness. Like you're going up to a higher altitude and you could have some effect from it. And then also like people actually like crap themselves. Like there was
no way.
Yeah.
Really? I did not know that.
People would get messed up in this thing. So what's the benefit of having that? I mean, I went through it. I don't know if you did.
I did not. Nope.
So they had gotten rid of it. Right. And we still had it, but I went through it, but, did I really get anything? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a risk associated with it? Yes. So is the risk really warrant that, and with the cost and everything? And, obviously there's a lot more physiology, and I would kind of present the case that just from an ORM perspective, not even being a physiologist, you could probably come to the same conclusion. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong if people do it. Like I know other countries still do it, but for the most part, if you could do normal barrack, you get the training you need, and there's basically no risk.
Yeah, and what I did, and I'm going to butcher what you love, so I apologize in advance. Essentially, you're hooked up right to that. You got the helmet on, you got the O2 mask on, but it's force feeding you nitrogen, like you said. You're changing that ratio, and you're flying some kind of a high fidelity flight simulator.
Yeah.
And the whole point is you're supposed to experience, what are your symptoms? Some people, your fingers turn blue, you get a headache. Yeah. I get a mild headache and I go straight stupid. I remember the person being like, "Hey, you're back." And I'm like, "Wait, I don't remember ever calling uncle." And they're like, "Yeah, because you just went straight stupid." Yeah. So everyone's different, I guess.
They are. And it's insane. It's really cool. The more experience I get, how much I can tell how different some people are. In fact, I had one of the VT-10 instructors recently, and I was so perplexed because his heart rate and his oxygen percentage didn't present like anybody else I had ever seen. And so of course I was like, "What do you do? Like, I can tell you do something. What is it?"
I bet I know who this person is.
Oh, do you? All right,
I have a guess. Cool. We can talk call signs later.
Yeah. And so
we have some healthy people there.
Yeah.
At the
right?
squadron. Yeah.
And so I was like, first I was like, "Well, do you run marathons?" Blah, blah, blah. And actually this person said no. So maybe it's different than you think. But yeah, usually marathon runners present a certain way. But it actually was like, he was talking about these breathing techniques he does and this book that he read and everything. And I was like, this is awesome. And it was like, and it must be cool for him too, for him to see that I realized and recognized something that maybe he doesn't see. He does his performance in the gym and he probably feels pretty good about it, but to know that I was able to witness it and react to it, or maybe he thinks I do that for everybody, I don't know, but it was cool to be able to see that. But yeah, so basically I deprive you of oxygen. You're on the mask. Your oxygen percentage drops down. Most people will start to feel uncomfortable in the 80s, and then definitely will start to get to the point where, most people will really drop off in the 60s and 50s, where you still can kind of be capable. And then when you start to get in the 60s and 50s, you just drop off significantly, where you're just going to forget everything. And the good news is people will pull a green ring. That's the emergency oxygen supply. Obviously, in this case, where it's a simulator, but it would do the same thing for the aircraft. Of emergency oxygen supply, I supply the emergency oxygen to them. They'll come back and they'll be, "Man, I messed up. I didn't pull a green ring." And I'm like, "No, actually you did." Like, so the cool thing is, even if they do go really far, they still know to do it, even if they forget. And obviously in the aircraft, they wouldn't have let themselves go that far. A lot of people know that it's like a safe space to go a little further with me to see what it really would have felt like, which I think is smart, because in the aircraft, you might not have recognized it as soon as you thought. Like, that it's happening when I'm with you, right? But if in the aircraft, you might be like, "Oh, did I eat the wrong thing? Am I working hard because we're pulling G's? Like, what is it?
Am I tired? Am I dehydrated?"
Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, "Oh, I am." And then, it's right there on that edge of that drop off. So that's what I do with that.
Very cool. Yeah, it's very valuable training. I think we get, I don't remember exactly. I probably should know the periodicity, every 2 years or 3 years. There you go. That was a good guess. I did my last one up at Norfolk. Okay. So yeah, it's got the same thing I did from the very, very, very beginning. But I actually, in my little airplane, I fly. It's in the left side, in the left seat, there, a blood pulse oximeter. Oh yeah. Every so often when I go up really high, it's a little, general aviation airplane, but I'll put it on and it's like, oh wow, yeah, I'm hovering way lower than I thought I would be. I can feel the effects, but when I see a number to kind of tag with that, it's like, oh, yep, okay, the number, it means something. It's not just...
It is, and that's one of the things we've thought about incorporating. I have a friend who's an experimental psychologist, an AEP, who's also a dual designator, by the way, but he went backwards. So he was an experimental psychologist first and then went through the pilot pipeline. Brainiac dude, going to go to Pax River, will probably be an astronaut one day. But, one of the things that those experimental psychologists do and Pax River, and even us as physiologists consider, is putting more things on us to sense what's going on in us in the aircraft. That there's, once again, risk benefit. Like, is it worth having one other thing to monitor the human system inside of this other system? Maybe not. I don't know. The argument has been made both ways, but as of now, we don't monitor the.
Yeah, I've wondered about a Garmin watch, because I know those can measure.
So
I don't know how well they measure it. That's the real question.
So it's funny. It's funny you say that, because we actually were given Garmin watches about 3 or 4 years ago.
Is this the great OBOGs? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering if we were going to get there. But
Talking with the other Sinatra Chief of Naval Aviation Training, right? AMSO's Aeromedical Safety Officer, which is what I am as the physiologist for the command. We've been talking about how this Garmin watch existed at first as an OBOGs, when we were worried about people's oxygen concentration. But now it really doesn't exist. And most everybody who got those watches, they just all disappeared. So we don't even have any of them.
They all kept
anymore.
them, yeah.
And that was all before I showed up anyways. But yeah, the idea of the Garmin watch would be to fit that billet. But the problem was it doesn't really probably have the capability you would really need.
For tracking, logging.
To the degree that of what we would talk about. And because even when we test people after they land, if someone has an episode, by the time you test them, there's going to be nothing that would show any evidence of anything. It would have to be instantaneous to be able to measure that. So we're kind of lacking in that capability. And also in the defense of measuring that stuff is that for the most part, most things that happen are hypercapnia nowadays, which is the excessive amount or lack of CO2 within the blood. So when you hyperventilate, obviously you're off-gassing too much CO2. That's why if you ever notice somebody that's in a brown bag breathing back in, they're breathing this extra CO2 back in. It's not just so that they can look at their breathing in the bag. It's actually to get the CO2 back in. But when you're hyperventilating, you're off-gassing too much CO2 and your blood pH gets off. And the symptoms of that are very similar to normal hypoxia, mainly because of the way that it eventually causes cerebral hypoxia. So you're getting similar symptoms. So anyways, what I'm saying is a lot of times we're like, oh, if we tested them, maybe we would have known this other stuff, CO2 or whatever, or not CO2, sorry, maybe carbon monoxide or OBOGs or an contaminant or whatever. But a lot of things we've discovered is that it's, breathing dynamics. Not that people are freaking out. That's what especially when I teach my class, I tell people all the time, it's not that you freaked out. It's that literally when you're in the aircraft, the way that we are designed is not to consume the oxygen that's given to us in the aircraft. I'm designed to have 21% oxygen at sea level pressure all the time. I get more than that, more oxygen concentration than that in the aircraft at a different pressure. Plus it's dry air, not moist air. It's, I'm wearing a system, I'm wearing a mask, all these things that change your breathing dynamics significantly enough that even the slightest changes, I deal with marginal degraders in my job a lot, right? Those slight changes can be enough that can mess you up, even if you're a perfectly calm person. Like people think, oh, you must have freaked out. Like, no, it's literally the fact that it was just delivered in a way that your body didn't react to it the best way that day. So often we get mad at the engineers because they'll be like, OBOGs is perfect. And I'm not damning OBOGs in any way, but it works as it was designed, but it's not a perfect system because it was not designed perfectly for us, because it's pretty much impossible to have a perfect system for us. Even airlines don't even have a perfect system. With as big as their system is, they still have to, go up to like 10,000 or whatever feet. Perfect would be sea level, because in order to do that, you're talking about weight, you're talking about like the capacity, all of these machines that just can't exist.
Yeah.
So anyways, going back to when I teach that stuff and the measuring and all that, a lot of times nowadays we kind of realize that it's just breathing dynamics. Now it could still be that other stuff, and we will test people obviously when they land, and maybe we'll discover stuff.
So back to the training, how long does it take for you to get your wings? Yeah.
So I showed up in January, and I think I got my wings in May. So I guess it was like just under 6 months for me. And granted, remember I skipped through all the flight doc training. And in fact, that part where I flew the T6 happened after I got my wings. It was kind of like, oh yeah, you can go be a doc and do that as a good deal thing. But so I just went through the AMO course and did all those research project type things and learned to present the core physiology training things that physiologists give, which would be spatial disorientation, G tolerance briefs, and high altitude hypoxia. Like those are our bread and butter, right? If we're giving those to anybody, people have been flying for 30 years or brand new people, that's what we need to be good at. So we had to present those and get graded on them, get really good at, not saying and delivering and answering difficult questions and all those things. So did that during the time, and then got my physiology wings and was I'm physiologist number 334.
Ever. That's cool.
Yeah, so like I said, there's only 100 of us right now, and only 330. I think we're in the like 360s or 370s probably now. I don't know. I mean, I got my wings, holy crap, 7 years ago now as a physiologist. So I guess there's probably been quite a few more than that. Maybe like 10 or so a year, I think, is about what we're doing. So we're probably in the 400s now, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's really, I think, for those, I have a very small civilian background before joining the military and aviation, but a lot of folks don't realize how great the training we have is. In the civilian world, people will talk about it. Maybe if you're lucky, you have an instructor that has a story about spatiality or about being, feeling hypoxic. But we present it in a classroom, and there's books, and there's knowledge, and there's hopefully, like you talked about, there's that simulator, right? Like there's so much great learning that I don't know if you necessarily appreciate it when you're going through it in the moment. Sometimes it might be like, oh, I have to hear about this again. But when you look back, hopefully you can pull back lessons from that. Hey, here are my hypoxia symptoms. For spatial disorientation, do you have any, I don't know, it's a thing. I have had it happen in helicopters and airplanes in good weather and bad weather. I'm not saying it happens all the time by any stretch, but I've got some good stories I like to tell folks. What's kind of maybe the elevator pitch, the stuff that you like to impress upon our young NFOs, student NFOs,
well,
sorry.
The story I will tell, I'll tell my favorite story that I'll tell sometimes to student NFOs. I'll definitely tell it to instructors. Like this morning I taught instructors, right, for their annual requal, is a time where I was flying with a buddy, the spatial disorientation story, off of San Diego on my fleet tour. So back in 2010 maybe, I can't remember. But we knew it was going to be, talked about the monster that rolls in off the Gulf, off of the Pacific. It wasn't that. It was going to be an actual layer. Like there was going to be clouds, but it wasn't going to be bad. We're just going to get some actual time. Great, cool, let's go fly. So we filed for it, expected it. And then as we were climbing, he was in the right seat, I was in the left seat. And we were climbing left and into the clouds. And as we climbed into the clouds, he said, I messed up. And I was like, cool, I'll take control. So I took the controls, started flying, and I felt a little feedback. So I was like, hey man, I got the controls. He's like, yeah, you got them. And I still felt a little feedback. So I looked over and I saw him death gripping the controls. And I was like, hey man, let go of the controls. He's like, yeah, I did. I was like, you definitely did not. Like I could see your hands on the controls. So he still wouldn't release. Like he was just so messed up. So my crewman actually came up, reached across in front of him, grabbed his hands, picked him up, and shook him in front of his face and was like, here's your hands. They're now off the controls. Had to show him specifically. And, it's a funny story now, but I use that story a lot because I joke around that if that same thing happened off the boat at night, my crewman would have been strapping himself in as tight as possible, waiting for us to hit the water if we were fighting over the controls. He wouldn't have been going up front. But it's interesting because that's a story I think we don't hear about much. You hear about unrecognized, which obviously is, the one where people don't even know and they fly into the ground. But this is one where the guy knew something about it but couldn't do anything about it. And I think those are like the ones we kind of forget about. There's probably been, and I can't do research to prove this because we don't know, but it's kind of my theory that there's probably been a lot of these incapacitating, if you will, where someone recognized they were messed up and just couldn't do anything about it. Where we often will say, oh, they flew it into the water at night, it was unrecognized. Well, was it? Is it possible that they knew, they just couldn't fight it? I've had that hand of God, I don't know if you've had, where I'm trying to make the controls do something and I can't push against it. It feels like something's pushing the opposite direction. Especially like going to the back of the boat at night. How many times do people get hung up way out there and they never get any closer I can tell you why that's happening now that I'm a physiologist, right?
Why is it happening?
Well, it's because at nighttime, the boat becomes your horizon, okay? So what happens is whatever the most dominant thing that is out there is your horizon, right? So if there's a real horizon, you would never, ever get to it, right? The horizon's always infinitely far away. So if your boat is now a horizon, right? If you were going to cross over that horizon, that threshold, right? That's opposite of what your subconscious mind would see when it's thinking about a horizon being infinitely far away. So as a result, it sees the horizon, the boat, and then it matches what your mind would think any other horizon is. And it keeps that sight picture. So it just hangs out with that exact same distance forever until you're like, no, you have to drive through it. Like you have to push through it and get past that threshold of which will be over that horizon, essentially, even though it's not real. and then put the aircraft down on the deck. And so people just get hung out way out there.
Wow,
and
yeah.
that's the reason. So
Makes perfect sense.
yeah.
Jeez Louise. You talked about G tolerance. So in the T6, we can pull a little G, right?
Yeah.
But you've got the wing. You're training Air Wing 6, so you have the T45s. Have you gone to the centrifuge? Have you done all that?
I did not do the centrifuge, but I have flown in the T45 and puked.
And there's no shame in that. I don't want anyone to think there is.
Shoot, I puked at the T6. So
Me too.
yeah, but no, there was the option to go, I think, when I was an intern. So when you finish, when you get your wings, you go to an aviation survival training center. So I was in Pensacola for 2 years, at the Dunker, doing all that, learning everything. And during that time, you can go do other things. Like I went to become a night lab instructor. You learn that there. Learn to be a technical laser safety officer. Went to that course. Things like that. So when you go be an AMSO somewhere, you can teach stuff.
For those listening, for the love of God, do not laser aircraft. I don't know where this passion comes from. People get these astronomy lasers and they point them at aircraft and helicopters.
Yeah.
For the love of God, do not do that.
Sorry,
I just had to put that plug in there.
Which actually, speaking of, that's like what I got more than anything in Kuwait was lased. I got lased all the freaking time.
Really?
Yeah, just all the time, just shooting lasers at us. But
yeah, don't do that.
But I could have gone to the centrifuge. But I think when you finally know if you're going to go to like be a jet AMSO, they'll send you to the centrifuge. I was going to be the HSM AMSO in San Diego. So I was like, there's really no purpose. So there wasn't a reason for me to do it. And I also was just like, I don't want to just go get sick and pass out. So I was like, maybe I'll do it later.
Well, that was the reason I was going to ask, is some of our students that are going through intermediate, getting ready to go to advanced at VT86 will ask about the centrifuge. I'm like, hey man, I'm a helicopter guy. I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
I think be well rested, exercise.
Yeah, right. Honestly, if you want to pass, just smoke a cigarette beforehand.
Really? Why is that?
I mean, you're gonna vomit, but it's
but you're gonna pass,
it's a vasoconstrictor, so it'll make it so that it'll actually make you maybe increase your tolerance. So it's always we joke around that like the people who have high G tolerance, right, are smokers and drinkers and carotid arteries and whatnot. But I wouldn't actually smoke a cigarette before you go. But all the guys who go through seem to have pretty good success.
I've heard. Let's see, if you're like lean, a runner, tall, those folks have a lot more trouble, right?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get the term right. I'm butchering what you love. Aortic column. Is it between your head and your brain? Am I saying the right thing, or am I using all sorts of wrong words here?
No, it's funny. You're talking about like a hydrostatic column?
That's probably what I meant to say.
Basically, the way we usually equate is like, obviously from your heart to your brain. And so like I have a long torso, so that is, it requires more pressure.
Yes, you have to pump that blood up to your brain.
Exactly.
Okay. See, look, I told you I'd butcher something you loved. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a long torso person, so I'm a weak G guy. You need short, stubby dudes to be able to pull a lot of Gs.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Okay, after you finished up the training, where did you go? You talked about 2 years at the Dunker. So actually, let's talk about the Dunker, because a lot of people don't realize, like, I love it. As dumb as it sounds, I got an all-qual when I was at Pax River. I'm like, yes, I want to even do the E2 harness, ride that down to the water.
Oh man, well then we should take you over to ASTC Pensacola and see if they'll let you do the CBR gear ride, because that is awful,
terrible. Have you done it?
Yeah. So,
oh my gosh.
So to be a NALST, which was a Naval Aviation Water Survival Training Instructor, so it's like the people who overrun the pool deck for all that high risk training for the day. You had to have the specific qual, and I wanted to do it because I thought it was interesting to do all this stuff like you were talking about. But one of the things we had to do, and it's not in the Dunker, it's in the sweat chair, so the one that they flip you over, which actually is worse, to be honest.
I think it is, yes.
But you're basically wearing this gas mask that you have to get flipped over, peel the mask liner off, but the pressure keeps the mask on. So, but it's just enough when you pull the liner off so the water starts to fill up like a scary movie. So it's basically filling up until it fills up enough where it's covered your face that then it would pop off. And then you put a habit bottle in. And then once you've done that, then you release and try and swim out.
No, thank you. That sounds like that sucks.
Yeah. So
but what I tell folks that haven't had the experience, because it does seem scary, right? You see the videos of, I think it was actually kind of cool with Top Gun 2. They showed some of the actors in the water. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what it looks like. It's the same little box. But it's crawl, walk, run, right? Like I will freely admit, before the Navy, I was not that great in the water. And I, purposely fought to be better at it. And then even the training, I was like, I don't want to wash out because of this. And, you start in the shallow end. And you talked about, you got the little I don't even remember what you call it, the two little doors, and you have the little harness. You go down, you pull yourself.
I think it's called
hand.
the swimmer.
The swimmer.
You
Okay.
know, obviously
Yep.
that acronym has. There's something to go with it.
Oh,
that
sure.
I don't remember
Some
at this
big,
point,
long
but
Navy
yeah,
acronym.
you just drop down.
Yep.
Shallow in, hand over hand. Do it with the blackout goggles.
But you're in 2 feet of water. Like you could stand up
right,
and you're fine.
and it's safe. And they're watching you and they'll pull you up, and then you go to the chair, which, like I said, I think it's almost worse because you get flipped so fast, water goes up the nose, and then throw the door out, get out the door, whatever it is, do all that, and then you eventually go to the dunker, and then dunker goes and it spins one way or the other, and that one can be bad, especially if you're behind somebody who's slow or they kick you in the face, which happened
or
to
you
me.
bite your seatbelt.
Yeah,
I did that where it was one of the rides where you could. So some of the rides, you have to hold your breath. Some of the rides you can actually use the. Am I going to get it right?
The Habit bottle.
Habdi bottle. Thank you.
Yeah.
The Habdi bottle. And so I wait very calmly, flip upside down, and you always have a reference point. So I was still strapped in. I remember grabbing the regulator and I put it in my mouth, and the seatbelt because you're upside down, had floated in the way, and I bit seatbelt, and I was just like, "What is happening?"
Did you not freak out?
I did. Surprisingly, I didn't. I remember just like sweeping it out of the way, put the regulator in, and that one good breath, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. Reference point. With one hand, release with the other, and just hand over hand your way.
As long as you stay calm. Although I ran out of oxygen once on a bottle once, and that
sucked it dry.
Oh my gosh, that was hard to stay calm. But luckily working there, you get used to doing all kinds of stuff. We would do re-enlistment on the dunker, and
no way.
It was a great time. I loved working in the pool.
So that was 2 years, right?
2 years, and we would work at the land survival section too. Parachute landing falls, do the zip line and jump off and practice your parachute falls and first aid and all those classes I was already talking about, G-tolerance, spatial disorientation, all that. So yeah, 2 great years. I loved it. In fact, I would go back. The job probably won't be open when I can row from here, but I would love to go back because I like the teaching and I liked it.
Sure. Any good stories in the pool or stories during the PLF? The little ejection seat thing. I was kind of disappointed at PAC because I didn't get to do the one that like shoots you up because it was a requal.
Yeah.
But
Pensacola, I wonder if they even still have that one. I kind of forget that it's been 5 years since I left that job.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that long ago, but things have changed since I left, but they used to have that one where you'd pull it and get shot up, lose 2 inches on your overall height. But
yeah,
I don't know if they do that one anymore. But as far as fun stories go, I just really enjoyed the pool. It was great. It was great working there. I mean, especially when pool day, it's a long day, but you're in shorts and a t-shirt or whatever, and you're jumping in the pool and swimming around with the guys and checking on people and trying to help them learn to swim. I actually liked doing helping instruct in the morning with like people who are having trouble swimming and stuff. Like you can see their progress. So that was cool.
That's got to be a good feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. So after that 2 years, where'd you go next?
So I went to San Diego to be the COM HSM Wing Pack AMSO. So HSL, like we were talking about earlier, 60, it was the 60 Bravos became 60 Romeos as the HSM community. And so even though I was a 60 Sierra guy, there's already always been a 60 Sierra Wing AMSO, but there was never a Romeo AMSO. So even back when I was at HSC 23 and I did night lab, obviously the AMSO taught that class, but I didn't know who it was. I wasn't really aware of AMSOs in general at that time. But anyways, they said, hey, knockers, there's this job, HSM AMSO is going to be a brand new one because there hadn't been one before. You're a helicopter guy. You've been from San Diego. Do you want the job? Like, yeah, obviously no brainer. Of course I'll take the job. And luckily, a friend of mine who was the HSM Lant AMSO was a dual designator, and he was flying out there, and he called and greased the skids for me. So as soon as I showed up, I immediately went through the FRS and got 60 Romeo called. So I get to use my pilot wings and fly the 60 Romeo. And it was great too because being a Sierra guy, I didn't know any of their missions, so I just didn't fly any of those missions. I just became a hack and flew SAR, day fam, night fam, instruments, all the good stuff. Anyways,
still needs to get done.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Although I did have to do dip to dip on my NATOF check, which for you,
yeah. What's that term? I'm not familiar.
So dip to dip is what the Romeo guys do when they're like searching for submarines, and they lower the sonar into the water, and then like, so you're basically going from one location to another, and you're like whipping it around and like dropping in real quick. And it's over land or over water during the day, it's actually pretty dynamic flying. It's pretty fun. Nighttime, it's different. But the interesting thing is, I could never actually do that mission for real, but it's part of their NATOP check. So I had to learn it for the NATOP check. So I had to do it, even though I have no idea what it actually would have done with that.
That's
tool.
cool.
So
it's not a deploying position, right? You're going to live there in San Diego.
Yeah. So it's considered a CTOR in that I was it's a deployable wing in that it's, all the squadrons. So I had 12 squadrons, two in Japan, one in Hawaii, and then obviously the rest in San Diego, mix of carrier and expeditionary. So that was considered a CTOR, even though I didn't deploy, but I did go to Hawaii. And
I was going to ask if there's any travel you're going to see those squadrons.
Yeah, how awful that was to have to go to Hawaii multiple times and Japan. But going back to what I mentioned before, like Japan is actually pretty freaking awesome. So I go to Atsugi and visit the 2 Romeo squadrons there, 1 carrier, 1 expeditionary, and then I go to K-Bay and visit the Romeo squadron there.
Sure.
And usually fly with them and then do whatever annual training they needed, the AMSO specific stuff that technically I should teach rather than somebody else per 3710. And so that's why I'd always try and visit them and then do other updates like, lasers, night lab, whatever it might be.
Sure. What, how many years were you in that job over in San Diego?
3 years.
3 more years. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of your time, so that's your first time as an AMSO back in the fleet.
Yeah.
Let's say that checkout, at the end of your 3 years, if you could give advice to that guy that walked in the door at the beginning, what are things that you wish you'd known, wish you'd seen, maybe blind spots you had?
Well, like for the guy coming in after me, who actually was a dual designator too. So it's funny, I said there's only like 10 of us and all the people I happen to mention are dual designators. But I kind of was just like laying it out, like since I was the first one in that job, we weren't really sure what, maybe the people weren't sure what I should do and what I shouldn't do. And I probably took on certain things I probably shouldn't have been doing, maybe just to make sure that I was pulling my weight within the wing or whatever. And I think it would be more to focus just on physiology, because the truth is it sucks because, even you, right? I work with you, but you don't know probably half the stuff that I do. And most people don't know half the stuff that physiologists do. And a lot of times it's behind closed doors. It's like with a no real near-term goal result, meaning like, often things that we'll set in motion, we won't see the results of for years. And so it'll very much appear that we aren't doing certain things. And so sometimes we have to do other things. And I think the focus should just be like, don't worry about that noise and just focus on those things. Even if it's going to be 4 years or 5 years from now, just focus on those things that ultimately will benefit the community, even if it sucks that you're not the one getting credit for it. But yeah, like, PALM, right? PALM, what does that stand for? But it's basically, there's like, whenever we do an aircrew systems ENARG, so ENARGs are where they basically decide what money is going to go towards certain things. And they do PALM, meaning whatever the freaking year is going to be. So like, I think it was recently PALM 20, what do they usually do? 3 years ahead of time? So like 25 or something like that. So you're talking about systems, right? Whether it's for the aircraft or whatever, but in my world, it's aircrew systems, which is gear. What are we going to do, and how am I going to prove that we need this thing? And really, even 3 years from now, it's probably only getting on the bottom of the list. So it's probably going to be, 4 or 5 or 6 years before it's at the top of the list. But you need to start somewhere. And so that's the kind of stuff of like showing the research, doing surveys, actually going and seeing it on people and taking pictures and showing why this stuff needs to change or whatever. And that's the kind of stuff that nobody ever sees. And that's the thing that I struggled with, because you had a product often when you were in a squadron or something, like spreadsheets for spreadsheet's sakes, but at least you had something. Whereas in AMSO, a lot of times it's like, what have you done? What do you do here, Bob? Right? So like, I would try and maybe do other things that I shouldn't have been doing just to make it look like I was proving that I had some reason to exist at the wing.
Gotcha.
And now I've settled in my older age and my contentness of... what you have to do. Yeah, and not worrying about what other people think. And the great thing is, no one put pressure on me back then anyways. I put it on myself. But here, nobody puts any pressure on me. And I think they understand. People might often kind of wonder, and then all of a sudden they'll see some product maybe that come out of us, the AMSO's realm, and they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Like, hopefully they get a little bit of an understanding. So it's just like, be confident in just doing physiology stuff not maybe some of the other stuff, if you can help it.
If I had to guess, I think that's the power of you being a dual designator. You still fly the aircraft. So it's not just like some esoteric, you're getting data from, us dumb pilots that maybe only understand 30% of the question, right? Like, you do it yourself. You live it yourself. And so when you make that feedback, you're not just presenting data. You can also present, anecdotal evidence too, which sometimes, whether it's right or not, is probably better at convincing people to spend that money or to, allocate those resources.
Yeah, it's funny because like I love when the PhD and master types have some awesome research to like back stuff up, but it's really nice sometimes when I am in an environment where I'm speaking with engineers or whatever, and I can be like. And they'll be like, well, what would the pilot say or whatever? I'm like, well, I could tell you what
Let me
they
ask
would
him.
say. Yeah. And so I've been very fortunate in that I feel like in the jobs I've been in, me being a dual designator has allowed certain, I don't know, I guess clout would probably
Absolutely.
be the
Yes.
right.
I think that's exactly the right word.
So, and they've responded well to it. A lot of times where somebody's like, oh, okay, cool. Like you can speak to that with this or that. So, and I don't know, I do not know it all for the pilot side, and I definitely don't know it all for the physiology side, but luckily I know enough about both where when there is something in between that maybe I can speak intelligently to it, hopefully.
Sure. Okay. So I want to kind of wrap up San Diego because I know where you are next because we're sitting here at your kitchen table.
Yeah.
Where'd you go next after that?
So I am the Training Wing 6 AMSO. With the student NFOs for VT10, VT4, and VT86. And luckily enough, I'm able to fly as an associate instructor at VT10, even though I'm wing core, if that's what you want to call me. So I'm not part of 10, but luckily you guys let me go through the FIT-U, of which it took me a while because I actually started to go through when we first moved here, but we had a bunch of stuff going on. And it's funny because I'm a safety guy and I didn't recognize the fact that I probably should have taken a break from flying. But I took a break and luckily enough was able to come back and get qualified. And now I love it. It's great. So fly with you guys and teach instrument ground school with the core classes, spatial disorientation, high altitude, hypoxia, G tolerance. And then with the new students, it's those in addition to, hey, here's all your gear. How does it fit? How does it fit in the aircraft? Let's practice strapping in, doing all that. And then air sickness as well, which of course, whenever I teach, any of the classes I teach, I don't teach with PowerPoints pretty much ever. Going back to stories and anecdotal stuff, I usually just ask people for evidence. And if there's something like, especially with previous, refreshers like you are, I usually ask for a story. Somebody has a story. And it's great because, all right, cool, I'll take the science from that and we'll talk about it. With new guys, usually I'll tell my own stories to the students. But if I say from the beginning, hey, this is how the class will go, these are all the things we'll teach, what do you want to talk about? You know what the number one requested thing is?
I'm guessing air sickness.
It is.
Yep. I'm going to ask about it too. Yeah.
Pretty much without fail, they say air sickness, which I guess is just because they're so nervous about it.
Yes.
They're not worried about getting spatially disoriented or G tolerance or any of that. They're just worried about puking.
Which ironically, those things are probably scarier and probably have more of it.
Yeah, you're not going to die from just puking.
I mean, I guess you could maybe, but it'd be a lot of puke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think you're exactly right. They have that very basic, if they've done any flying before, okay, sure. But they have that very basic look in a Cessna at knife. Yeah. And so it's hot in the back of a tin can. Maybe you're getting bounced around while the guy up front is doing stuff. You might have a bad first look, and then you think, oh my God, the T6 is going to be a million times worse.
Right.
And it might be. You get a flight suit, all that gear on, a G suit, a helmet. You're hot, you're sweaty, or it might not be. But that little bomb is in your brain, and that's all you can think about.
Psychosomatic, man. And that's why when I do talk to them, I'm like, all right, there's two things I want you to start doing today. And the first flight won't be for like a month probably, right? But I'm like, first off, drink a ton of water. Like people think that they're properly hydrated and they aren't. You need to start drinking today to be hydrated a month from now. I know that sounds weird, but like to get not to that.
You're trying to saturate those cells.
I'm just saying it requires. It doesn't require a day, right? It requires more than that, but it requires a habit pattern as well. It's not this idea that you can just do it overnight, and it's not the idea that you can do it over a couple of days and then you'll stay hydrated. It's that you have to establish that kind of pattern. So
You've offered me water politely like 3 times tonight. I'm already feeling guilty about saying
Yeah, that's
no to
why
that,
you see I'm chugging, man. So that's one. And then the other thing is I just tell them to like relax. And how can you relax, right? Because a lot of it is it's just so much nervous. So if they study, that'll help them relax. Because one reason, obviously, anybody who's gone into a test, unprepared, knows that feeling of nausea. And so that's one reason. And the other thing is people who don't study, you can tell, you've probably fallen with the ones, their head is down the entire time. And then they're not looking outside and you're totally going to get sick. So those things, plus if you're not prepared, all that, you're just going to be more nervous. And so I usually just tell them, relax. If you show up and you kill it on the brief, you get to go have fun. You get to go freaking fly an aircraft for your job. Like, how awesome is that? And so hopefully that encourages them. But I know people are still going to get sick no matter what. I got sick. It happens. So
what's so the term spin and puke? Some people might be familiar with the spin and puke chair. Some people not know what we're talking about. What is the chair? Can you kind of talk me through what that experience is like for someone that's having trouble?
The Barney chair, basically.
Oh, sorry. So it has an official name.
An official name.
Oh, my.
If I'm pronouncing it right. But basically what it is it's a chair that you sit in, kind of looks like an office chair, elevated a little bit with a giant ring around it, that is motorized. It plugs in and it spins, in place. So you're directly on one axis spinning about, what is that? Yaw, basically, right? So you're just spinning in a circle. And the purpose of it is not to puke. People call it the spin and puke. And honestly, I've only had one person ever puke. And it was somebody who wasn't even a VT-10 person. This is an IFS person who I was helping out because they were pretty bad. So this is someone who's probably not even going to show up to 10. Like, they're really, really bad.
Yeah.
But honestly, you should never puke. So people are always scared of it. But the point of it is just to stimulate enough of that same response that you would get in the aircraft, but back off. If you imagine a stress curve, right? When you start to get to the distressful side, that's bad. We want to stress to the point where there's going to be growth and learning, but not to the distress. And so I want to stress them to they get the physiological response, and then, hey, we're going to back off a little bit, go straight and level, essentially. But basically, you're spinning in place and you're moving your head around in different directions to simulate a turn or an aileron roll or whatever it might be. And that's what people will come and do in between flights. Ideally, flying is the best adaptation. Nothing beats that. And that's why when students call me and they're like, hey, I had my first flight. First off, why are you calling me? But, hey, I had my first flight. I got air sick. I'm like, okay, yes, go fly again. Like, I don't care. Like, I do care. You're great. I love you. But you're good students. But,
yes.
But I am not going to do anything for you today. The only thing is you getting in the aircraft tomorrow and flying again, and then probably even the next day. Only after it becomes some kind of series of bad events. But most everybody, by that third flight, is going to be adapted, like probably 90%. And then there's going to be some people who still probably have some passive air sickness, but even still they'll get over it. And then there's going to be those few that like, yep, it could be in ground school for a while. You're going to be out of the aircraft. Come see me. I'll put you in the chair. It's just so you can stimulate you so that when you do get back to the aircraft and we're doing dynamic stuff again, you're kind of ready to go as best as you can be. It's no substitute, but it's something for them.
No, it makes sense. And that's the thing I like to tell students. And I kind of cringed for a second there because I might have maybe told a student like, hey, yeah, make sure you check in with the AMSO and you're over here fielding phone calls after flight one.
I know, especially when I get them at like 7:30 on a Friday night. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah, I've gotten them later than that. But yes, I know
the new generation.
Kids these days and their internets. Yeah. So that's bad gouge on us for maybe setting them to do that quickly. But yeah, I like to tell them trust the process, right? Like we don't want you to fail. I've heard so many people talk about, like, back in the day they had an instructor that tried to make them air sick. And I never had that experience personally. And I, as an instructor, would never want to make someone air sick. Like what? It's no badge of honor. I'm not trying to like help you find your limits. That's not the goal at all. So, we want you to succeed. We want you to use the process. If it comes to, you've been air sick for 5 flights in a row or whatever. We want you to seek help. And that's what people like you are here for, is to be that bridge.
Man, I was so upset with myself the other day because I was doing a fam flight and I mean, I don't know if I made the student sick, but he got sick. And I was just like, I was so upset with myself because I was like, dang it. Like, I was also like, why didn't you let me know? Like, I wouldn't have done, because we were doing, ELPs and I was like pitching it up and like trying to come around. And that's probably what got him sick. And in the landing pattern, he had said before, like, he just doesn't do well in the landing pattern, but he didn't vomit or anything like that.
Just passively or sick?
Passively. And he had been done. And I don't want to create any kind of negative, like the psychosomatic effect. Because unfortunately, some people get so bad that they'll just smell exhaust or, jet fuel, and they've just been triggered now that they're going to be in that mode, and we don't want to do that. So
of course not.
I'm with you. I don't want to get anybody sick.
Yeah.
So I try and avoid it as best as I can. And I've been pretty good at it. I had on wings, and one time I was like, hey man, we have to do the spin. Like it's time, right? Yep. So we went and did the spin. He vomited, and then I was like, all right, sorry. But,
puking around.
Yeah, but we got home, and I put it at the very end of the flight for him. So at least that was better. But yeah, I try and avoid it. And also dealing with the airsick students a lot. In flying, I've done the adaptation flights where I fly the student to, on a profile to help him get towards adapting. I want them to succeed. So I definitely don't want to get them over. And me being as miserable as I was when I vomited, I definitely want to avoid that for anybody else.
Okay, Knocker, so I've been saying it a couple times, but I don't think I've ever actually asked, what's the story of your call sign? I think that was a fleet thing, so we're jumping back and forth.
Yeah, can I make it, like, my wife, she actually encourages this, so it's okay.
Oh, boy.
She actually jokes around and tells people if I'm around, like, she'll jump in and say, she says, it's because of me, But obviously it's not.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my original call sign was so dumb. I was in ops at HSC 23, and someone was like, the OPSO in fact was like, we're just gonna call your call sign's gonna be knock, so your name would just be knock knock. And people are like, nah, that's really dumb. And then one of the other guys is like, no, it's just knockers, that's it, it's knockers. Like, and people are like, isn't that inappropriate? And he's like, no, it's his name, it's knockers. And maybe it's inappropriate, it is my name, but it is funny because everywhere I go, people are kind of like, is the name inappropriate? But then nobody ever asks any questions.
That's great. Is it painted on an aircraft?
So, it's not. I need to get it on one of these. But the cool thing about it is when someone said, hey, it's going to be knockers, I just was like, kept my mouth shut, because I liked it. And the reason I liked it and I kept my mouth shut was because that was my dad's call sign as well. So so the patch I wear, if you see on my, not on my flight suit that actually has our wing patches, but if I wear my jacket, that patch says knockers. That's actually my dad's patch. So it's like
that's cool.
40-year-old patch that I wear on there. So
that is really, really cool. That heritage is, I'm the first generation in naval aviation in my family, but to have that to lean back on, that's really cool.
Yeah. I don't think it was my granddad's call sign back in the 40s.
Might have been something different back then. Yeah. That's cool. Okay, so for someone, you've talked a lot about what the job entails being an AMZO, and especially here for the wing. How many people are you responsible for? It's got to be a lot.
Oh, man, that's a great question.
Hundreds, I'm guessing.
Hundreds, yeah. Students is in the hundreds. Instructors is significantly less.
Yeah.
I could look at one of my reports, but I don't pay attention to it. I know it's a lot less than I had when I was in San Diego because, I had freaking 12 squadrons and all those people. But some of the courses I teach here are a lot more robust in that they're new for the students or whatever they are.
It's a lot of information for them.
Yeah.
The reason I ask about it is we've kind of defined some of the specific roles and responsibilities, but for someone that's thinking about being an AMZO, be it a winged aviator, or maybe you can come in as a civilian, right? With that background you talked about and just be a straight AMZO, not dual qualified like yourself. What would you tell that person that's thinking about the job? Maybe the goods, the bads.
Oh man.
Why do you want to do it?
Awesome job.
Okay.
Awesome job. You're with aviation. So like, let's say you've always loved aviation, but maybe you're like, I don't want to be a pilot. Like I never want to be a commercial airline pilot or whatever. Like you still get to be part of aviation. And if anything, one of the benefits is you get to be parts of all of the aviation community, right? Like, I'm a helicopter guy, you're a helicopter guy. And now you flew fixed wing because you're luckily enough at a VT, but other than that, you're not, that's it, right? But hey, I can go fly in a jet, right? I can go fly in a V-22. I'm all qualified. So I can fly in anything that the Navy and the Marine Corps owns. Now, obviously, I usually have a reason to do that, but I can usually sell that reason as, I have training and there's some value to that training. So physiologists jump around from commands and switch. I was with helos, now I'm with fixed wings and jets, and, next command I might be with Marines, right? So there's benefit of mixing it up and doing something with aviation. And if you're interested in the science of human body, right, human performance, all that, you get to take this specialty and teach it with people who are professionals, though sometimes they don't always seem like it. They're like, I've heard this 20 years in a row. But you get to teach them stuff, and hopefully in a new way and related to why it's important to them. And so you get to be involved in the military, but not necessarily in the degree if you wanted to be somebody who's like a warheads on foreheads type guy, but you can also be supporting that in a way. And for those dual designators who want to come over, I mean, like I said, it's just, I really liked being a straight pilot. I did, but I didn't love my ground jobs. And when I joined to be a pilot way back when I was in high school and was like, all right, I'm going to the Naval Academy, I thought it was going to be more like being on a sports team, in that it was like you just practice and play. Instead, I found, and nothing wrong with it, but it was like you do all this other ground job stuff and then you practice and then maybe you play, and the ground job, it just never really was like stoked on it. I was always kind of like, yeah, whatever, I do this or whatever, but like, aviators don't ever really talk about the other stuff they do on the ground. But now as a physiologist, I'm happy to talk about the stuff I do on the ground because it's cool to me. Now some of it frustrates me and I bang my head against the wall just like any other job. But I really find an interest in what can I change, right? Like, I already said I have health, fitness, nutrition interests before all this. Like I have a long torso, I have back problems. How can I improve helicopters to get rid of these back problems? What can we do for our pilots and aircrew to eliminate the back problems that I experience, so hopefully the next generation won't have that, or whatever it is, right? So you can do practical stuff. It's, all of these cool niches you can kind of fit into. It's kind of like a pick your own adventure job, in that there's certain straight things you should do, but what else you could kind of do in physiology is up to you. Like, all right, what could I do for Training Wing 6 with this or that? And I love that aspect of it, as opposed to, hey, you're in training, build the spreadsheet, make sure people get that done, which has its importance, but it was just never me. And this has allowed me a lot more growth in areas that I really enjoy.
For sure. What do you think is next? Any idea? I mean, you're certainly not done here. You got a little bit of time left, I'm sure. But
just over a year left here. So that'll take me to over 17 years. So I'll have 3 years until I could hit 20. I don't mind saying it on the radio or on the podcast, because it's not like it's going to shoot me in the foot, but I'll probably be getting out at 20. It's not like me saying this, everybody's going to be like, oh, at Knockers, what the hell, man?
The big surprise. Yeah. Millington, the teletype is running now. Yeah.
But, I mean, my wife and I have moved around. We've been married since 2009. So 13 years of moving every 2 or 3 years. We've never been in the same location twice, ever. And now that we have kids, I would really like for them to be in the same location. So that's why, even if we moved after this, I hope we stay in Pensacola for our final job, but I would probably be getting out at 20 just so that the kids don't have to move again and kind of get settled. But I love the job. If I could stay in the Training Wing 6 job for like 15, 20 years, I would do it. Like, it is awesome because I enjoy the instructors, 1086 for all of them. I enjoy the students. I enjoy the work I do. And I feel like it's a good balance here. But that's not a possibility. So what's the next job? Our headquarters, physiology headquarters, is basically the Naval Survival Training Institute is in Pensacola. So there's some jobs there. There's a job at Schools Command, actually. So like the anthropometrics, so measuring people to see if they'll fit in the aircraft, which I can relate to because I'm the maximum sitting height for, at least for helos. I know I was like disqualified from a couple aircraft, so I'm a long torso guy. But
it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember very early, it was API for both of us, right? You go into it's like an appointment on a certain day, and they measure a bunch of random dimensions. So like knee to butt. And you would think, why does that matter? Well, in an ejection seat, that distance,
your knee is going to hit the dash and you're going to lose your kneecaps.
Yeah, exactly. But you wouldn't think that that's something like, I don't know, people want to round the edges and say, I'm 6'2" and 200 pounds. I would fit. Well, maybe, but maybe not.
It's crazy because you see some giants, some like 6'8" dudes who fit all perfectly, just barely in the anthropometrics. And then you see like somebody who's 6 foot and they got disqualified for something else because they just didn't have that right measurement. Yeah. And it's like, dang, you're 8 inches extra, fit perfectly, and his didn't. So, so that's a job that I could get. So hopefully stay in Pensacola and continue, especially because then I can also continue to be an associate, hopefully, if VT10 would allow me to instruct, because I enjoy flying in the T6. and just kind of do that until 20. And then after that, people always ask me, like, what are you going to do? And to be honest, my answer is usually nothing. Like,
you've earned it. Yeah.
Hopefully at 20, I could do nothing.
Yeah.
So
That's a noble goal for sure.
We'll see.
Knockers, this might be, I don't know, as an aviator, as an AMSO, it can be a broad question, maybe even as a naval officer. But I always like to ask folks, what do they think, that typical interview question, right? Greatest strength, greatest weakness. Looking back, because it's not over yet, right? You still got several more years of this Navy career still going in naval aviation. But is there stuff that you maybe wish you'd done differently, or things you can look upon yourself and say, no, I'm really glad I did it that way. I stuck it out. It can be as broad or as shallow as you want it to be, but things you look back on.
Yeah, gosh, these are good questions. I didn't really think about any of this.
Well, you don't have to. I'm not looking for a canned answer. But.
No. I mean, I'll try and give you honesty. I think one of, they say lieutenant is the best rank in the Navy because, like, you have enough responsibility and it's funny because, like, I used to be like, JOPA. But I have to say, like, 04 is a pretty good rank because I feel like that's ultimately where it's like you do have enough rank where you can, and experience where, like, I can feel confident in my decisions. Like, even still as a lieutenant, I felt pretty confident with them, but somebody could kind of always still smack you down, like, no, shut up, lieutenant. And now, so where I'm at now, I feel very comfortable in that I feel like I can make the decisions that I think are right. And maybe it's because I also know that I'm, like, going to make it to 20. Like, I'm a little bit more of a safe spot, that I'm maybe a little bit more, I don't think I'm in any way rude or, out of place, but I think I'm more confident in being okay with the consequences of making the honest decision and the right decision. And I wish I could have been that way a lot when I was younger, because a lot of times when you're younger, you might say this right, or what you think is right, or maybe you're just being hot-headed, or maybe you don't say anything at all because you're afraid of how it might come across, and things don't change as a result of it. And I feel like luckily I'm comfortable enough now to say what I really think should happen for change, right? But I'm also comfortable enough to know that if somebody above me says, no, this is the way it is, that I'm okay to be like, okay. Whereas when I was younger, I would be like, that's wrong, F that, like someday, but I don't get all bent out of shape, I don't think, like I used to. But I'm also a lot more, like, steadfast in why I would make a decision. So
might be kind of related, might be similar. If you could do it all over again, anything you would have done differently, any career choices, or it can be big, it can be small. I look back and some things I know, like, yeah, I wish I'd maybe kept my mouth shut here or there. Or
yeah, I wish I probably had kept my mouth shut on my JO tour at the end at HSC 23.
Oh, really?
Just because I think that was probably some situations where I think that's kind of when I basically was like, I don't really want to be a department head or a skipper at a squadron someday. As much as I loved flying, like, I really love flying, but it didn't look fun to me, which is sad because I've read into a lot of aviators since who've said, if us at the front office and our department heads weren't making the JOs think they wanted to be them someday, then they were failing. And ultimately, like, I had some great skippers and I had some great department heads. I'm not saying any of them were bad. I'm just saying there were some that I saw that I was not interested in ever being like them. So I probably verbalized that I had no interest in that too soon, which put me off that golden path a little too soon.
Yep, that's fair.
And I think I was doing it in the right place, but I was doing it in the wrong way, in that what I thought would be required to be a really good department head and a skipper would be someone who really needs to have Navy number one. And I'm not saying you can't have a family and other priorities, but ultimately I just saw these guys, and the ones who are successful almost looked like they had to put other things to the side. And I just didn't ever see myself as being that guy. I thought that there could be balance, but it didn't seem like to be on that golden path necessarily you could have that balance. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's been guys who've proved that wrong. But for me, it didn't seem like I could have the balance, and that's what I kind of was saying. It was never that I didn't want to be a skipper. It was that, hey, for me to be a department head or whatever I would need to do on this golden path, I think would be, I couldn't deliver that to my enlisted, for example, and that would be unfair to them for me to be in that position, because I would always put my life and my wife and priorities first. And so as a result, I kind of was shooting myself in the foot. I think and that was because I was young and hot-headed probably, and now I could probably look at it and go, okay, maybe there could be a balance and maybe I could have done that. But even still, I'm glad it kind of set me on that path, because I do think that I probably wouldn't have been, two things would have happened, right? I wouldn't have been the best department head for the squadron I was in, meaning I would have been doing them a disservice. I might not have been the best father or husband for my family, and so I might have been doing them a disservice. And like I said, there's probably people who could have done both, but it probably wasn't me. And so it's probably good I wasn't a golden path guy, to be perfectly honest. And luckily enough, I've found a job that I feel like I do have a good balance at, and I feel like I do pretty well at. I've been fairly pleased with the feedback I get from people I instruct with and deal with within the physiology community. So hopefully I've picked the right path and it all worked out. And I hope that physiology doesn't feel like they gotta, he wasn't on the golden path for aviation, so I guess he came over to physiology, and that was never it. Like I still was doing great within aviation. Like I feel like I would have been fine, but it just wasn't I wasn't on fire for it, But when I found out about physiology, I was like,
well, you mentioned the phrase golden path, and that's maybe kind of like a very specific Navy-ism, right? We always talk about, the golden path to make CO or admiral or whatever that might be. But yeah, it's not like, statistically, not everyone's going to be on it, just literally by the numbers. It's not possible, but that doesn't mean that you still can't contribute something, right. To the greater naval aviation. We're going to talk about naval aviation because we're both naval aviators, but to that greater community. And I think you certainly have. Like, it's just everyone has a different way to contribute it. I don't know. It sounds like it's been a good thing. So anyway, I always end these the same way. I've taken up way too much of your time. Thank you for working with the schedule and finally making a night for this to work.
No, you're fine. I appreciate you being interested. Absolutely. I hope I actually had some interesting things to say. You
did. And here's my goal. Like, I've spoken to a ton of aviators, and I'm trying to make sure you are an aviator, but I want to broaden that aperture, right? Like, I'm trying to find some maintainers, folks that work in ATC. I want to talk to just more than pilots, right? Because we're at a certain point, the stories get kind of boring, right?
Hopefully mine had some different flavors to it. Like your transition outside of the pilot, but just enough pilot that maybe it's like still keep some of those listeners in.
Heck yeah, for sure. Well, again, I want to say thank you for taking the time and making this work, but I always end these the same way, which is I want to give you the last word. So anything maybe I didn't ask you or maybe something you want to throw in there, it's over to you. You've got the last word.
Gonna say something cheesy like Fly Navy, but
that works. Go see Top Gun 2.
Freaking.
It's a documentary, by the way, for those that haven't seen it yet. Have you seen it yet?
Top Gun 2?
Yeah. 100% real.
Yeah, right.
I definitely. Suntan, shirtless on the beach. Yeah.
I will say, like, I'm a helo dude, but I love all aviation. So jets are still cool. The Blue Angels flying today. It's impossible to not stop and look at them. Like, I can't, right? You grow up, and I just wish that we had more helo demonstrations, like side flaring in, like videos of guys coming in, picking up loads. That'd be cool. But rotor aviation. This will be my last word. Okay. If you're a helicopter pilot out there, right? Freaking show people that helicopters are also cool, right? Because my wife was joking around about how she gets so frustrated because she's seen what the helicopter can do, and so whenever she sees a helo just being like just dumb, slow, whatever, she's like, it just is such a disservice. Like, helicopters are cool too. And I know jet guys listening to this are like, yeah, whatever, but they are. It's just unfortunately you don't see it in the capacity. So for a helo guy, show people it can be cool too. Don't be a cowboy, but
yeah, do the right thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's an awesome machine.
Yeah.
Knockers, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.